I'm Olivia Carter, 32, and until last spring, I wore a $590,000 engagement ring designed by my fiancé Daniel before cancer stole him from me. The platinum setting with his grandmother's diamonds was my anchor, my memory, my everything after the funeral. Then I discovered my parents had stolen it from my finger, sold it to fund my sister Madeline's luxury healing retreat in Bali. They expected tears, a tantrum, eventually forgiveness. I gave them something else entirely. If you're joining my story today, take a second to let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me because what happened after I walked away changed everything for all of us. My life before everything shattered looked pretty perfect from the outside. I'd built my jewelry design studio in Boston from scratch, specializing in custom pieces that tell personal stories through precious metals and stones. Clients came to me wanting more than just beautiful jewelry. They wanted pieces that carried meaning and emotion. I prided myself on translating their life experiences into wearable art, something that had become even more important to me after losing Daniel. My reputation for emotional storytelling through jewelry had earned me features in national magazines, and a waiting list of clients seeking that personal touch that mass-produced jewelry could never capture. Despite coming from a wealthy family, I'd insisted on financial independence, turning down my father's repeated offers to invest in my business, knowing all too well that his money always came with strings attached. My studio became my sanctuary. After Daniel's death, a place where I could channel my grief into creating beauty for others while maintaining my own space apart from my family's complicated dynamics. Working with my hands kept me tethered to reality during those darkest months when grief threatened to pull me under completely. Each piece I completed felt like a small victory, proof that I could still create something meaningful even with my heart in pieces. My clients never knew that their commissions were quite literally saving me day by day, giving me a reason to keep moving forward when everything in me wanted to stop and collapse under the weight of loss that had become my constant companion. Daniel came into my life like some beautiful accident at a charity art auction 4 years ago. He'd outbid me on a sculpture I wanted, then offered to let me visit it at his architectural firm where it would be displayed. That first meeting stretched into dinner, which stretched into the most authentic connection I'd ever experienced with another human being. His architectural background complemented my jewelry design perfectly. We spoke the same language of form, function, and beauty. We'd spend entire weekends sketching together, his buildings and my jewelry pieces somehow influencing each other in ways neither of us expected. He had this incredible ability to see the potential in raw materials that others might overlook, a talent that extended to how he saw people too. With Daniel, I never felt like the responsible daughter, or the successful one as I did with my family. I was simply Olivia, fully seen and completely loved. When he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer just 18 months into our relationship, neither of us anticipated how quickly it would progress. Between treatments, we compressed a lifetime into precious months, traveling when he felt strong enough, collaborating on designs, and planning a wedding we both suspected might never happen. His determination to design my engagement ring became almost an obsession during his final months. He would sketch from his hospital bed, consulting with his jeweler friends, sourcing the perfect diamonds from his grandmother's heirloom pieces. The ring became his final creative act, a way to leave something of himself behind that I would carry with me. He died just 8 weeks before our planned wedding day, leaving behind half-addressed invitations on my dining room table that I couldn't bear to move for months afterward. The ring became everything to me, not just jewelry, but a physical manifestation of his love and creative spirit that I could touch and hold even when he was gone. The ring itself was unlike anything I'd ever seen, despite working with fine jewelry every day. The platinum setting Daniel designed featured 3 main diamonds from his grandmother's collection, arranged in a way that caught light from unexpected angles. He'd incorporated architectural elements that referenced his own design work, making it both a piece of jewelry and a miniature sculpture. Around the band, he'd had engraved a message visible only when tilted at certain angles, building our forever, stone by stone. The jeweler who executed Daniel's design told me afterward that it was one of the most technically challenging pieces he'd ever created, requiring techniques rarely used in modern jewelry making. Beyond its appraised value of $590,000, it was literally priceless. a one-of-a-kind piece that could never be replicated because it contained not just rare stones, but Daniel's final creative vision. I developed a daily ritual of touching the ring whenever I needed to make difficult decisions, as though Daniel's wisdom might somehow flow through this last thing his hands had helped create. During the darkest days after his funeral, I would wake up panicked in the middle of the night and find myself twisting the ring, its solid presence reassuring me that what we had shared had been real, not just some beautiful dream from which I had awakened. The true value of that ring could never be measured in dollars. It was my connection to Daniel, the physical embodiment of our bond that even death couldn't completely sever. When clients commented on its beauty, I found myself protective of its story, sharing only surface details rather than the depths of what it truly meant to me. How could anyone understand that this wasn't merely jewelry but a lifeline, anchoring me to a love that continued even after Daniel was gone? The dynamics in my family laid the groundwork for everything that would eventually unfold. My parents, Victoria and Robert Carter, came from old Boston money and had built their lives around maintaining and expanding that fortune through my father's investment firm that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. Our family name opened doors throughout New England, and my mother devoted herself to ensuring our social standing remained impeccable, regardless of the emotional cost to anyone involved. My younger sister, Madeline, 27, had developed a pattern of dramatic crises followed by expensive rescues that had become our family's normal long before Daniel entered my life. Where I was labeled the strong, independent one who handled things herself, Madeline was forever fragile, needing protection and exceptional support for even minor setbacks. This dynamic played out in countless ways over the years. My parents paid her college tuition for 3 separate degree programs, none of which she completed. They funded her failed jewelry business that suspiciously resembled my own established studio. They hired expensive attorneys when she faced DUI charges after wrapping her luxury SUV around a tree after a night of partying. Through all of this, I maintained family harmony by accommodating their priorities, swallowing disappointments when family events were rescheduled around Madeline's latest crisis, accepting that my accomplishments were noted briefly while her smallest efforts were celebrated lavishly. The previous Christmas had provided a perfect example of this imbalance. My parents cut short our traditional family dinner because Madeline had called in tears over a minor argument with her then-boyfriend. As they rushed to console her, leaving me to clear the table and pack up gifts alone, I remembered thinking how predictable it all was, never imagining that this familiar pattern would soon escalate into something that would permanently alter all our relationships. Despite everything, I genuinely believed my parents loved both of us equally. They just showed it differently because Madeline needed them more. It would take the ultimate betrayal for me to finally question this comforting fiction I'd maintained to preserve my sense of family. Madeline's newest crisis arrived with predictable dramatic flair 3 months after she'd begun dating Ryan, a hedge fund manager she'd met at one of my father's client events. Their breakup, initiated by Ryan after what appeared to be a fairly ordinary disagreement about vacation plans, triggered a response from my sister that suggested she'd lost the love of her life, rather than ended a brief, shallow relationship. My parents immediately canceled our long-planned trip to visit vineyards in California, a rare opportunity for me to spend quality time with them without Madeline dominating the conversation. "Your sister is absolutely devastated, Olivia," my mother explained during a brief call. "She needs to move back home for a while. You understand, don't you? You're always so capable of handling things on your own." I murmured appropriate sympathies while swallowing my disappointment, something I'd perfected over decades of similar situations. Within days, Madeline had installed herself back in our family mansion, complete with her numerous suitcases and my parents' undivided attention. From the outside, anyone would think she was recovering from a life-threatening condition rather than a 12-week relationship's natural conclusion. My father hired 3 different therapists after Madeline, dismissed the first 2 as not spiritually aligned with her needs. My mother reorganized the household staff to accommodate Madeline's new sleep schedule, which seemed to involve staying awake until 3 in the morning watching self-help videos and sleeping until mid-afternoon. Meanwhile, I continued working at my studio, processing my own quiet grief as the 1-year anniversary of Daniel's death approached, a milestone that went unmentioned by my family despite its looming presence in my daily thoughts. During our weekly calls, my parents devoted perhaps 30 seconds to asking about my business before launching into detailed updates about Madeline's emotional journey and her growing interest in various Eastern healing practices that my mother researched extensively and my father funded without question. I didn't begrudge my sister finding comfort in these practices, but the contrast in how my family treated our different forms of pain had never been more stark or difficult to ignore. The formal dinner invitation arrived by courier one Tuesday afternoon, heavy cream stationery embossed with our family crest requesting my presence for an important family gathering that Friday evening. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps my parents had finally realized the significance of Daniel's upcoming death anniversary and wanted to offer support. I selected a simple black dress for the occasion, wore Daniel's ring as always, and arrived precisely at 7 as requested, carrying a bottle of my father's favorite scotch as a gesture of appreciation for what I imagined might be a rare evening, focused partially on my needs. The table had been set with formal silver and crystal, candles lit, and fresh flowers arranged artfully down the center. My first clue that my hopes were misplaced came when I noticed every dish being prepared was one of Madeline's favorites, not a single item among them that I particularly enjoyed. The second clue was the champagne chilling in silver buckets, a celebration clearly planned rather than the supportive conversation I had naively anticipated. Throughout the elaborate meal, my parents and Madeline exchanged knowing glances that excluded me entirely, the conversation dominated by my sister's latest insights from her spiritual advisor and plans for the next phase of her healing. When I carefully mentioned the approaching anniversary of Daniel's passing and my struggle with that upcoming date, my mother patted my hand distractedly and said, "Yes, dear, but that was almost a year ago now. We really should focus on moving forward, don't you think?" Before immediately turning to ask Madeline about her morning meditation practice, I noticed my father's eyes repeatedly dropping to my engagement ring throughout dinner, an unusual attention. That made me unconsciously protective, turning my hand slightly whenever I caught his gaze fixating on it. My mother, too, seemed oddly focused on changing the subject abruptly whenever the ring caught the candlelight or when I mentioned anything related to Daniel's memory. The evening felt increasingly uncomfortable, weighted with unspoken tension that I couldn't quite identify, but that settled like a cold stone in my stomach as courses came and went. After the main course, I excused myself to use the bathroom, carefully removing Daniel's ring to wash my hands as I always did to protect it from soap residue. I placed it on the small marble counter, directly beside the sink where it would remain clearly visible. Just as I was drying my hands, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from a client about a commission with an imminent deadline. The call lasted perhaps 3 minutes as I clarified a detail about gemstone placement while standing in the bathroom. When I ended the call and reached for my ring, it was gone. My initial reaction was confusion rather than alarm. I checked the floor, my pockets, even looking behind the faucet, thinking it might have somehow slipped. As minutes passed and my search grew more frantic, checking and rechecking the same spaces with increasing desperation, cold realization began seeping into my consciousness. I returned to the dining room, trying to maintain composure while explaining that my ring had disappeared from the bathroom counter. The family's reaction was oddly subdued given the value and significance of what was missing. My father merely suggested I had probably left it at home or dropped it somewhere on the way in, despite my absolute certainty about removing it at the sink. My mother immediately steered the conversation to what she called Madeline's exciting news, while my sister avoided direct eye contact, studying her dessert with sudden intense interest. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of confusion and growing unease. I searched my purse multiple times, checked the bathroom again, and even looked under the dining table, met with my family's visible impatience at what they characterized as my overreaction. On the drive home, I found myself repeatedly checking my empty ring finger, the absence of Daniel's final gift creating a physical ache that transcended mere loss of a valuable object. Something about the evening's strange atmosphere and my family's unusual behavior left me deeply unsettled, though I still couldn't articulate exactly why their reactions seemed so wrong. The following days brought a series of odd occurrences that transformed my unease into active suspicion. I received a call from our family jeweler, Martin, who began asking about the appraisal for the ring before abruptly claiming he'd dialed my number by mistake and hanging up. A text from my mother asked if I had found that thing you were looking for, with phrasing so deliberately vague it immediately raised red flags. While visiting my parents' house to search the bathroom once more, I overheard Madeline on the phone in the garden, her voice carrying clearly through the open window as she mentioned something about a deposit that finally cleared and Bali confirmation. Later that same day, I received an email from my father regarding a family trust reallocation that appeared to have been sent to me accidentally, with language suggesting significant funds had recently been moved between accounts. The pieces began arranging themselves in my mind, forming a picture I desperately wanted to reject. The final confirmation came when I ran into Elizabeth, my mother's oldest friend, at a cafe near my studio. After initial pleasantries, she mentioned casually, "I saw your mother at Bergman's last week. Such a prestigious buyer of estate jewelry. Was she helping you with a commission?" Bergman specialized in purchasing high-value pieces quickly and discreetly, often from families needing immediate liquidation of assets. That night, unable to sleep, I sat in my apartment cataloging every strange comment, every averted gaze from the dinner, every suspicious interaction since. When morning came, I drove back to my parents' house, letting myself in with my key while they were at their country club. In my father's normally immaculate study, I found a glossy brochure partially hidden beneath financial papers. Transcendence, a spiritual healing luxury retreat in Bali, featuring private villas, personal gurus, and yacht excursions. The pieces weren't just falling into place anymore. They had formed a complete picture that turned my blood to ice. With growing dread in my stomach, I launched an active investigation, starting with an unannounced visit to Martin, our family jeweler. The moment I walked into his shop, his normally friendly expression faltered, replaced by nervous tension, as he busied himself rearranging displays. "Olivia, what a surprise! I thought you'd be preparing for your sister's trip." When I asked directly about my missing ring, his discomfort became palpable. He avoided direct answers, mentioning vaguely, "Your mother's request," before claiming a client had arrived for a private appointment, practically ushering me toward the door. His behavior confirmed my suspicions more clearly than any admission could have. Back at home, I accessed our family's shared cloud account, where decades of photos and documents were stored. Searching recent activity, I discovered deleted emails about asset liquidation and private collector arrangements in my mother's recently deleted items folder. Cross-referencing dates with my parents' bank statements, accessible because they'd insisted on keeping me as a signatory in case of emergencies, I found a deposit for exactly $590,000 made 3 days after my dinner at their house. The physical evidence of betrayal hit me with such force that I found myself gasping for breath, hand pressed against my chest as though physically wounded. I contacted James, a jeweler friend of Daniel's who had assisted with creating my ring. His reluctant confirmation was the final piece. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you, Olivia. Your mother brought it in last week with documentation claiming it was family property. Said you'd agreed to sell it to help your sister. The buyer specializes in architectural jewelry pieces. He'd been looking for something with Daniel's influence." As I connected each devastating piece of evidence, my body responded physically to the emotional assault. Waves of nausea, uncontrollable shaking, a splitting headache that persisted for days. Sleep became impossible as my mind continuously replayed every interaction, searching for signs I should have recognized sooner. Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I drove to my parents' house the following morning, knowing Madeline would be alone while my parents attended their weekly golf game. I found her in her bedroom, surrounded by expensive new luggage, carefully packing designer yoga clothes still bearing price tags. Crystal healing books, luxury skincare products, and resort wear covered her bed in organized piles. When she looked up and saw me standing in her doorway, her expression shifted from surprise to a strange mixture of defiance and guilt. "What are you doing here?" she asked, continuing to fold a silk meditation shawl that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me, and asked with uncharacteristic directness, "Did you know they sold my engagement ring from Daniel?" Her response stunned me with its casual cruelty. "Of course I knew. They sold it so I could go to this retreat and finally heal properly. I need this, Olivia." The matter-of-fact way she confirmed my worst suspicions made me physically steady myself against her dresser. When I asked how she could possibly justify taking something so precious from me, her answer revealed the yawning emotional chasm between us. "You don't need a ring from a dead guy anyway. It was just making everyone uncomfortable, watching you cling to the past like that." She proceeded to detail her upcoming 2-month transformation journey, costing $250,000, including a private villa on the beach, personal chef, daily private yoga and meditation sessions, spiritual counseling, luxury spa treatments, and yacht excursions to sacred sites. "Some of us are trying to move forward with our lives instead of dwelling in grief forever," she added, returning to her packing. The final knife twist came when she said, "Honestly, you've been making everyone uncomfortable with all this mourning. Daniel wouldn't want you moping around forever. At least, something good is coming from that ring now." I left her room without another word, physically ill from the interaction, understanding for the first time that the sister I thought I knew existed only in my imagination. With concrete evidence and Madeline's confirmation, I confronted my parents. That evening in my father's home office, a room that had always represented authority and security throughout my childhood. Their initial strategy was outright denial, claiming they had no idea what had happened to my ring. When I presented the evidence I'd gathered, their approach shifted to cold justification. My father, seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, explained their actions as though discussing a routine business transaction. The ring was a practical asset that wasn't serving any productive purpose. "Your sister is in crisis and needs specialized treatment." My mother, standing beside him with perfect posture and not a hair out of place, added, "Frankly, Olivia, your attachment to that ring was becoming unhealthy. It's been almost a year. We were concerned about you." When I reminded them that the ring was Daniel's final gift, designed while he was dying, my father dismissed our 4-year relationship with stunning callousness. "He was just a boyfriend, really. Nothing was official. You have a successful business. You can commission another ring if it means that much to you." The conversation grew increasingly surreal as they revealed more details. They had sold the ring to a private collector specializing in architectural designs, kept a substantial portion of the money for family investments, and expected me to be reasonable and support my sister's healing journey. My mother actually suggested I should be grateful for the opportunity to move forward, now that the ring was gone. As I stood there, listening to their rationalizations, I felt as though I were seeing these people, my parents, clearly for the first time. The realization that they could violate my trust so completely while believing their actions were justified forced me to reconsider every memory, every family interaction through a new and painful lens. Their expectation that I would eventually accept their decision and return to normal family relations revealed how fundamentally they had always misunderstood me. This betrayal opened a floodgate of clarity about my entire family relationship. Memories from childhood resurfaced with new context. Birthday parties cut short because Madeline had tantrums. School achievements unacknowledged because my sister needed extra attention. College choices limited to Boston so I could help with family responsibilities while Madeline attended expensive schools across the country. The pattern had always been there, but I'd normalized it, made excuses, believed in the fiction of equal love differently expressed. Now, with Daniel's ring stolen from my finger by my own parents, that comforting fiction shattered completely. The grief I had been processing over losing Daniel reopened with fresh intensity, physically manifesting as chest pain so severe I momentarily wondered if I was having a heart attack. That night, sleepless and shaking, I reviewed family photos spanning decades, seeing clearly for the first time how I was always slightly outside the frame, how my parents' bodies always turned subtly toward Madeline, how my accomplishments were documented with quick snapshots while her minor milestones warranted professional photography. I called Daniel's parents, who had become like family to me during his illness and after his death. Their horror at what my family had done provided external validation that I wasn't overreacting. "That ring wasn't just jewelry," Daniel's mother said through tears. "It was his heart, his final act of love. How could they not understand that?" Their immediate offer of support contrasted sharply with my biological family's betrayal, highlighting the difference between genuine love and the conditional version I'd received throughout my life. For the first time, I began seriously considering the possibility of completely cutting contact with my parents and sister. As the pieces continued falling into place, I discovered through casual conversations with household staff that my parents had been planning this for weeks, deliberately waiting for an opportunity to take the ring when I wasn't wearing it. The premeditated nature of their actions, the careful planning rather than an impulsive decision, somehow made the betrayal even more painful and complete. My sister's going-away dinner was scheduled at Bordeaux, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, where my father had maintained a standing reservation for 20 years. The entire extended family had been invited to support Madeline's healing journey, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who had flown in specifically for the occasion. None of them knew about the ring situation. My parents had apparently told everyone I had generously contributed to Madeline's retreat. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored black suit that projected professional composure despite the emotional hurricane raging inside me. The strategic choice of a public venue had been deliberate on my part. I knew my family would prioritize appearances above all else, preventing them from creating a scene no matter what transpired. The maitre d' escorted me to our private dining room, where my extended family greeted me with the usual kisses and casual inquiries about my jewelry business. My mother's smile faltered momentarily upon seeing me, clearly having expected I might refuse to attend. My father overcompensated with excessive joviality, loud introductions, and hearty handshakes, creating a smokescreen of normalcy over the tension crackling between us. Throughout the appetizer course, I maintained quiet composure, responding politely to questions while observing the dynamics around the table. My sister held court at the center, detailing her upcoming spiritual journey, while omitting the luxury aspects that made it more vacation than treatment. My mother watched me nervously throughout, wine glass clutched slightly too tightly between manicured fingers, while my father maintained control of the conversation with practiced ease, steering topics away from anything potentially explosive. The extended family remained completely unaware of the undercurrents, raising glasses to toast Madeline's bravery in confronting her emotional challenges through this retreat, a characterization that would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. When the main course was served, I waited until everyone had been served, and the waitstaff had withdrawn before setting my plan in motion. Taking a small sip of water, I turned to my sister with a calm smile. "Madeline, why don't you tell everyone more specific details about this amazing retreat you're attending? It sounds so transformative." Eager for attention, she launched enthusiastically into descriptions of her private beachfront villa, personal, chef preparing custom organic meals, daily massages, and private yacht excursions between meditation sessions. As she elaborated on these luxuries, I noticed several relatives exchanging glances, the extravagance clearly surprising them given the supposed therapeutic nature of the trip. When she finally paused for breath, I asked in the same pleasant tone, "And how exactly was this retreat funded? It sounds quite exclusive." My mother immediately attempted to change the subject, commenting on the quality of the beef tenderloin, while my father loudly asked my uncle about his recent fishing trip. Ignoring both diversions, I addressed the entire table directly. "I think everyone should know that my parents sold my engagement ring, the one Daniel designed while dying of cancer, to pay for this luxury vacation disguised as therapy." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of my grandmother's fork clattering against fine china. My grandfather, usually so reserved, was the first to respond, turning to my father with disbelief etched across his face. "Robert, is this true?" The stunned expressions around the table reflected the magnitude of what I had just revealed. Even relatives who had never fully understood my relationship with Daniel recognized the cruelty in what had been done. My father's attempt to minimize through dismissive hand gestures and my mother's frantic whispers about discussing this privately only highlighted their awareness of how indefensible their actions were when exposed to outside perspective. The uncomfortable silence gave way to my mother's defensive admission, her voice tight with controlled anger at having family business exposed publicly. "We simply made a practical decision about an asset that was sitting unused on Olivia's hand. The ring was worth nearly $600,000. It made no sense to leave that kind of value locked up in sentimentality when Madeline needed real help." My father, always the businessman, actually added, "We negotiated an excellent price, well above market value, given the architectural significance of the design." My sister, apparently oblivious to the horror on our relatives' faces, complained that the retreat should have been longer, but was so expensive they could only book 2 months even with the ring money. The depths of their callousness revealed itself layer by layer. They told the jeweler the story about Daniel designing the ring during his final days was exaggerated for sympathy. They had planned this for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take the ring when I wasn't wearing it. They had expected I would throw a fit but eventually get over it like always, and return to normal family relations within a few weeks. As these cruel details emerged through their own words, I watched understanding dawn on the faces of extended family members who had never before witnessed this dynamic so nakedly displayed. My grandmother, who had given several valuable pieces to Daniel for my ring, sat with tears streaming silently down her lined face. This public unveiling of my family's true nature wasn't about revenge. It was about finally allowing the truth to exist in the open after decades of carefully maintained appearances. The breaking point came not with shouting or dramatic accusations, but with my family's unified response to having their actions exposed. "Olivia, stop making a scene," my mother hissed, leaning across the table with fury barely contained behind her society smile. "This special dinner is about supporting your sister, not making everything about yourself as usual." My father attempted to regain control of the narrative, explaining to confused relatives that I was always dramatic about that relationship and blowing things out of proportion. My sister rolled her eyes dramatically, sighing, "See what I have to deal with? She's making my farewell dinner all about her old relationship." When my grandfather attempted to defend me, saying quietly that selling the ring seemed unnecessarily cruel, my father shut him down with surprising aggression, reminding him who paid for his retirement community. In that moment, watching my cheer family close ranks against not just me but anyone who questioned their actions, something crystallized within me with perfect clarity. These people were incapable of recognizing the pain they caused. Worse, they felt entitled to inflict it whenever convenient for their purposes. The realization brought with it not anger, but a strange, profound peace. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of witnessing an emotional breakdown, or provide them with dramatic scenes to recount later as evidence of my instability. Instead, I stood calmly, deliberately folding my napkin and placing it beside my barely touched meal. I made eye contact with each family member around the table, one by one, memorizing their faces as though seeing them for the final time. To my parents and sister, I said only, "You've made your choice. Now you'll live with mine." Then I walked out of the restaurant while they called after me, their voices growing fainter with each step I took toward the door. Sitting in my car, afterward, hands steady on the steering wheel, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The decision forming in my mind wasn't an emotional reaction, but a clear-eyed assessment of what needed to happen next. The methodical preparation phase began that very night. Instead of returning to my apartment, I checked into a hotel under a business name, needing neutral space to think clearly without emotional attachments. By morning, I had contacted Catherine Walsh, an attorney specializing in high-net-worth family separations, explaining my situation and my desire for a complete, untraceable break from my family. Under her guidance, I began the process of systematically severing all connections to my parents and sister. I quietly liquidated joint investments with my family, transferring funds to new accounts at banks where my father had no connections. My home, a beautiful brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, was sold in a cash deal to an investor looking for quick property acquisition, closing within 10 days with minimal paperwork. I submitted my resignation from the Boston showroom, where I displayed my jewelry, giving the minimum required notice despite having built relationships there for years. Each day brought another step in my disappearance, carefully selecting irreplaceable personal items while donating everything else to the cancer foundation Daniel had supported during his illness. Implementing a digital footprint minimization, protocol developed by a security expert Catherine recommended, establishing new phone numbers, email addresses, and banking details under variations of my middle name. My mail was rerouted through Catherine's office, creating another layer of distance between my past and future selves. Throughout this process, I maintained detailed documentation of my family's betrayal, preserving evidence in case legal protection became necessary later. Each methodical step brought strange clarity rather than additional pain, as though I were a surgeon precisely excising a tumor from my life. The process felt less like running away and more like strategic advancement toward a healthier existence, leaving behind the toxicity that had shaped my life for too long. With each connection severed, each possession sorted, I felt lighter, more focused, increasingly certain that this complete break was not just justified but necessary for my survival. While methodically dismantling my Boston life, I maintained regular video calls with Daniel's parents, Martha and Richard, in Chicago. Unlike my biological family, they responded to news of my family's betrayal with immediate, unconditional support. "We've always had the guest room ready for you," Martha said during our first conversation after the restaurant confrontation. "Stay as long as you need. Forever, if you want." Their home represented everything my family mansion had never been. Warm, unpretentious, filled with photos of Daniel at all ages and genuine mementos of a life well lived rather than expensive. Showpieces selected by interior designers. During these calls, I shared the complete story of the ring's fate, including details too painful to process alone. Their horror at my parents' actions validated my own response, confirming that my sense of betrayal was proportionate to what had occurred. "Family doesn't do that to each other," Richard said simply, a statement that carried profound impact coming from a man who had lost his only son, yet still found capacity to extend genuine care to me. Martha, who had been so strong throughout Daniel's illness and after his death, wept openly when I described how my mother had dismissed him as just a boyfriend, really. Their invitation to relocate near them in Chicago provided not just practical support, but emotional anchoring during this massive life transition. During our conversations, Martha mentioned that she still had several jewelry pieces from Daniel's grandmother's collection that hadn't been incorporated into my engagement ring. "They should belong to you," she insisted. "You're the daughter we would have had officially if circumstances had been different." The contrast between this genuine family love and the conditional relationship with my biological family strengthened my resolve to rebuild my life among people who understood the true meaning of connection. With each conversation, I found myself grieving less for what I was leaving behind and focusing more on the chosen family waiting to help me rebuild. The power of my absence began manifesting almost immediately. The first confused text arrived from my parents the morning after the restaurant confrontation. "Where are you?" followed by, "Call us immediately." And finally, "This behavior is completely unacceptable." My sister's contribution was an angry voice message accusing me of ruining her special dinner and making everyone uncomfortable with my dramatic exit. As days passed without response, the messages escalated in both frequency and emotional intensity. My mother's tone shifted from irritation to the first hints of genuine worry. "Olivia, please just let us know you're safe. This silence is unnecessary." My father's approach remained controlling. "This is childish behavior unbecoming of someone your age. Call immediately to discuss next steps." By the end of the first week, my sister's Bali trip had been postponed as the family mobilized to locate me, an irony not lost on me as I continued methodical preparations for permanent separation. Catherine kept me informed of their increasingly desperate attempts to reach me, including hiring a private investigator who found nothing thanks to the careful protocols we had implemented. I maintained complete digital silence, my professional social media accounts deactivated, email autoresponders directing clients to colleagues who had agreed to handle transitions. The day I boarded a flight to Chicago, purchasing the ticket with cash and using my middle name for hotel reservations, I experienced my first genuine sense of freedom from lifelong patterns of accommodation and compromise. The phone in my pocket, silent of family notifications for the first time in my adult life, represented more than just a device. It symbolized my reclamation of personal boundaries after decades of having them systematically violated by those who claimed to love me most. That first night in Chicago, sleeping in Daniel's childhood bedroom surrounded by his books and architectural models, I experienced a complex emotional mixture. Profound grief for multiple losses alongside the first stirrings of genuine liberation, from patterns that had diminished me for as long as I could remember. Information about my family's escalating panic reached me through Emma, my one loyal friend from Boston who knew my location but had sworn to maintain my privacy. "They're absolutely frantic," she reported during our weekly secure calls. "Your father hired some fancy private investigator who's coming up empty. Your mother actually cried at her charity committee meeting when someone asked about you." According to Emma, My parents had filed police reports that were quickly dismissed when officers confirmed I was an adult who had chosen to leave, with financial transactions showing no signs of coercion or distress. She described my family's increasingly desperate attempts to locate me, calling every professional contact in my design network, checking hospitals across New England, even contacting Daniel's parents, who maintained the polite fiction of having no information about my whereabouts. My sister's luxury Bali retreat had been indefinitely postponed as the situation intensified. The family's focus entirely shifted to finding me rather than supporting her healing journey. More surprising was Emma's report about wider social consequences. The story has completely circulated through Boston society. Your aunt told everyone at the garden club about them selling Daniel's ring. People are horrified. The Bradleys actually declined your parents' dinner invitation last week, which has never happened. The extended family had fractured along clear lines, with most relatives openly condemning my parents' actions and expressing support for me wherever I might be. My grandfather had apparently confronted my father in his club's locker room, telling him he was ashamed to have raised a son capable of such cruelty. Most gratifying was Emma's observation that for the first time, my mother seemed genuinely worried rather than merely inconvenienced by my behavior, and my father had begun to realize that his financial resources couldn't solve this particular problem. Your sister is getting the cold shoulder from everyone, Emma added with poorly concealed satisfaction. Turns out people have limits to what awful behavior they'll tolerate, even from the Carters. My new beginning in Chicago unfolded gradually, beginning with a small apartment rental in the city's artistic district, far from the luxury condos my family would have expected me to choose. The spare bedroom became my new jewelry studio, equipped with only essential tools purchased secondhand from local artisans. I established my business under Liv Mason Designs, incorporating my middle name and Daniel's mother's maiden name, creating deliberate separation from my previous professional identity while honoring my chosen family. The first piece I created in this new space became a form of emotional catharsis. A simple pendant incorporating a tiny fragment of blue topaz Daniel had once given me, set in swirling silver that represented the turbulence and transformation of the past months. From this personal beginning emerged an entire collection themed around Phoenix imagery and rebirth, using materials and techniques I had never explored in my previous work. The freedom from family expectations allowed creative risks I would have avoided before, leading to designs with raw, emotional honesty that resonated deeply with new clients. My business grew organically through word of mouth in Chicago's tight-knit artistic community, allowing me to maintain privacy while establishing financial stability. Integration into Daniel's extended circle provided social connection without the pressure of explaining my past. These people knew and loved Daniel, understanding my grief without requiring elaborate explanations. Sunday dinners with his parents became a cherished ritual, building new traditions rather than trying to replicate lost ones. As the first holiday season approached, I experienced surprising peace despite the multiple losses of the past year. The freedom from constant family manipulation created space for genuine grief processing, not just for Daniel, but for the family relationships I had idealized despite evidence of their dysfunction. For the first time, I recognized that walking away hadn't been an act of vengeance, but of self-preservation, allowing me to build a life based on authentic connection rather than obligation and performance. My family's attempts to make amends began approximately 3 months after my disappearance, starting with a formal letter from my mother delivered through Catherine's law office. The carefully worded message expressed concern rather than genuine remorse, focusing primarily on the unnecessary pain my absence was causing the family, rather than acknowledging the hurt they had inflicted. My father pursued a different strategy, attempting to trace me through financial channels and business connections, offering substantial finder's fees to anyone who could provide my location. Most bizarre was my sister's social media campaign about missing my beloved sister, complete with carefully filtered photos of us together and dramatic posts about her ongoing emotional distress due to my unexplained disappearance. Their efforts intensified when the first private investigator failed to produce results, hiring a second with a wider scope and fewer ethical boundaries. Catherine kept me informed of these developments without sharing any details that might compromise my security, allowing me to maintain necessary emotional distance. My Aunt Elizabeth, the only family member who had immediately recognized the cruelty in their actions, reached out through Catherine with genuine concern and apology for not intervening sooner. When my grandfather experienced a minor health scare, my parents attempted to use this as manipulation, sending messages through every possible channel about his wish to see his granddaughter before it might be too late. Their most revealing effort came 6 months into my new life, an offer to replace Daniel's ring with one of even greater value and significance, fundamentally misunderstanding that the ring's meaning had never been about its monetary worth. Catherine discovered they had actually attempted to buy back the original ring, offering the collector substantially more than they had received, only to learn he had already incorporated some of the stones into a museum commission. Their continued focus on material solutions to an emotional violation demonstrated how completely they misunderstood the nature of their betrayal and the depth of damage they had caused. I maintained absolute silence despite these escalating offers and emotional appeals, growing stronger through consistent boundaries after a lifetime of compromise. Eventually, my sister's retreat was canceled entirely, the substantial deposit forfeited when the facility refused to reschedule for a fourth time, an outcome that brought me no joy but did provide a certain symmetry to the situation. 2 years after walking away from my former life, I had established myself firmly in my new reality. Liv Mason Designs had evolved from a small home studio operation to a boutique specializing in memorial and transformation jewelry, with 3 employees and a waiting list of clients seeking pieces that honored significant life transitions. I had purchased a comfortable brownstone in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, decorating it with items chosen for personal meaning rather than status or appearance. My integration with Daniel's extended family had deepened beyond mere acceptance into genuine belonging. Holiday gatherings, family celebrations, and regular Sunday dinners provided the emotional foundation I had always sought from my biological family. Perhaps most surprising was the gradual development of a romantic relationship with Michael, a sculptor whose studio adjoined mine in our shared arts building. Our connection had evolved slowly and respectfully, beginning with professional collaboration, before developing into deeper friendship and eventually cautious romantic exploration. He understood without explanation the space Daniel would always occupy in my heart, never attempting to replace or diminish that love, but instead demonstrating how hearts can expand rather than replace. My growing confidence in maintaining personal boundaries manifested professionally as well, with speaking engagements about grief and transformation through creative expression bringing unexpected fulfillment. The foundation I had established in Daniel's name provided scholarships for artists facing serious illness, transforming personal loss into ongoing creative legacy. Financial success beyond my previous Boston business allowed philanthropic involvement that connected me to a wider community of people, valuing authentic expression over social appearance. This new life wasn't perfect. Grief still visited in unexpected moments. Certain songs or scents could still transport me instantly to memories of Daniel. But it was genuinely mine, built on choices that honored my needs rather than subordinated them to others' demands. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through family obligation and professional achievement now recognized her inherent worth independent of external validation or sacrifice. From the smallest fragment of Daniel's original ring design, a tiny diamond I had removed for cleaning just before losing the ring and forgotten in a jewelry pouch, I created something new that symbolized my personal journey. Working with this single stone, I designed a ring incorporating phoenix imagery rising from stylized flames, the diamond positioned to catch light in ways that created unexpected brilliance from different angles. Unlike the original engagement ring, this piece wasn't about romantic connection, but about personal resilience. Not what I had lost, but what I had discovered through that loss. Wearing it became a different kind of daily ritual, reminding me not of absence, but of presence. My own presence in my life, my agency in creating boundaries, my capacity for rebuilding after devastation. The piece gained unexpected industry recognition, winning an innovation award for its technical elements and emotional storytelling, becoming the signature of my transformation-focused collection. Through creating it, I gained deeper understanding about the difference between remembrance and attachment, recognizing that memories live primarily in our hearts rather than external objects. While I would have given anything to have Daniel's original ring back, its loss had ultimately facilitated necessary growth that might never have occurred otherwise. This new relationship with physical symbols of loss extended to other aspects of grief processing. Photographs of Daniel moved from shrine-like positions to integration among images of my current life, representing continuity rather than separation between past and present. My professional work with clients seeking memorial pieces became more nuanced and effective through this personal evolution, allowing me to guide others through similar journeys of honoring loss while embracing continued life. The irony that my parents' betrayal had ultimately led to deeper healing wasn't lost on me, though it didn't justify their actions or diminish the pain they had caused. Reconciliation possibilities emerged gradually, beginning with a letter from my father that showed the first genuine signs of remorse rather than mere inconvenience. I've come to understand that what we did violated something sacred, not just valuable. This communication, arriving on the second anniversary of my departure, differed significantly from previous attempts focused on my return to the family fold. Instead, it acknowledged specific harms without qualification or excuse, suggesting my extended absence had facilitated reflection impossible during our previous contact. Through Catherine, I learned my mother had begun attending therapy specifically addressing her controlling behavior patterns, while my sister had completed an actual rehabilitation program focusing on emotional regulation and empathy development. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet with my Aunt Elizabeth, who had maintained respectful distance while occasionally sending messages of support through Catherine. Over coffee in a neutral Chicago location, she provided context without excusing actions. They fundamentally changed Olivia. Not completely, not perfectly, but significantly. Your absence forced confrontation with behaviors they've normalized for decades. After several such conversations over a period of months, I made the decision to allow limited, conditional contact, beginning with carefully structured phone calls characterized by clear boundaries and expectations. My father's voice, when I finally spoke with him directly, carried unfamiliar humility. We don't deserve forgiveness. We don't expect it. We just want a chance to know the person you've become, on whatever terms you set. My sister's seemingly genuine apology during our eventual conversation acknowledged specific harms rather than general regret. I took something irreplaceable from you because I wanted easy comfort. There's no justification for that. The first in-person meeting occurred in Chicago, on my territory with Daniel's parents present as support, my non-negotiable condition for this step. Watching my mother enter my home without critical assessment of decor or subtle suggestions for improvement represented visible evidence of effort toward change. Maintaining physical and emotional distance while allowing controlled contact created space for potential healing without returning to toxic patterns that had defined our previous relationship. The parallel journeys of grief and family separation taught me lessons about self-worth and boundaries that continue evolving daily. Through losing Daniel and subsequently my family connection, I developed deeper understanding of my value, independent of relationships or others' validation. The capabilities that had once made me the strong, reliable daughter underappreciated, because I handled things myself, became genuine strengths once deployed for my own well-being rather than family approval. I found compassion for my parents as products of their own upbringing without accepting their harmful behaviors, recognizing that understanding origins doesn't require tolerating impacts. The peace discovered through walking away from toxicity, rather than continuously accommodating it, transformed not just my personal relationships but my professional approach to designing memorial pieces, incorporating elements of both honoring loss and embracing continued growth. The capacity to forgive without forgetting allowed forward movement without minimizing legitimate harm, creating possibility for limited future relationship without returning to damaging patterns. My experience with clients seeking commemorative jewelry evolved through personal insight, helping others find balance between remembrance and continued living that had previously eluded me. The foundation established in Daniel's name supported artists facing illness while allowing his creative legacy to continue generating beauty in the world. Looking toward an open-ended future with possibility of limited family relationship, I recognize that healing remains ongoing rather than completed, requiring continuous attention to boundaries and honest assessment of interactions. The ring I now wear daily reminds me that disappearing wasn't running away, but running toward my authentic self, a journey that continues with each choice to honor my needs alongside but not subordinate to others. What would you do if someone took your most precious possession? Would you forgive, forget, or forge a completely new path? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to join me for more real-life experiences. Remember that sometimes the most painful endings create space for beginnings we never could have imagined. Thank you for listening to my journey. I never thought my own promotion party would become a battlefield, but I guess that's what happens when you grow up constantly living in someone else's shadow. My name is Rachel Wilson, and at 32, I had finally achieved what I'd been working toward for 7 long years, a promotion to marketing director at Horizon Media Group. The journey wasn't easy. Countless late nights at the office, weekends sacrificed to complete additional certifications, and the constant struggle to prove myself in an industry where results speak louder than words. When my boss called me into his office that Friday afternoon, I honestly thought I was being let go. Budget cuts had been happening across departments, and my stomach dropped as I walked through his door. Instead, he smiled and said, "Congratulations, Rachel, the director position is yours." I nearly collapsed from relief and excitement. That evening, during our weekly family call, I shared my news, trying to contain my enthusiasm while also hoping for some genuine recognition. My mother, Martha, immediately offered to host a celebration party at their suburban home where I grew up. "We'll invite everyone," she exclaimed with unusual enthusiasm. "Your father and I are so proud." Those words felt like water in a desert. I'd been waiting years to hear them. As I hung up, a cautious optimism bloomed in my chest. For once, I thought I'd be the center of attention, that my achievements would be acknowledged by the people whose approval I'd been seeking my entire life. But as I pulled up to my parents' house that Saturday, decorated with balloons and a banner that read, "Congratulations, Rachel," across the front porch, I couldn't shake a familiar feeling of apprehension. Experience had taught me that in the Yawai Wilson family, my moments in the spotlight had an expiration date, usually the moment my younger sister Jessica walked into the room. My career path hadn't been straightforward or easy by any measure. After graduating with a marketing degree, I started at Horizon as an entry-level social media coordinator, making coffee runs and scheduling posts while learning everything I could about digital strategy. I worked my way through every rung of the corporate ladder, from coordinator to specialist, then manager, senior manager, and now, finally, director. Each promotion came with its own set of challenges. The constant need to prove myself in pitch meetings dominated by men 20 years my senior, navigating office politics that threatened to derail my projects, taking on additional responsibilities without complaint or additional compensation. I'd sacrificed relationships, turned down vacations, and even delayed starting a family to focus on my career goals. The marketing industry evolved rapidly, and I evolved with it, learning coding languages, data analytics, and emerging platforms on my own time to stay relevant. Despite these professional accomplishments, my family always seemed to view my career with mild disinterest at best, dismissive condescension at worst. "Marketing? So you make advertisements?" my father would ask, year after year, never quite grasping what I actually did. My mother would nod politely when I explained campaigns or metrics, before quickly changing the subject to something she deemed more significant. The contrast with how they treated my younger sister Jessica couldn't have been more stark. 4 years younger than me at 28, Jessica had followed our father's footsteps into medicine, and from the moment she declared her pre-med major, she became the undisputed star of the family. Where my academic achievements had been expected, hers were celebrated. Where my career milestones received perfunctory acknowledgement, hers warranted family gatherings. "Your sister is saving lives," my mother would remind me whenever I shared a professional accomplishment, as though my work creating marketing strategies was merely playing on computers, as she once put it. My father, always conflict-averse, would remain silent during these exchanges, occasionally offering a conciliatory pat on my shoulder, but never actively challenging the family dynamic. Each holiday dinner became an exercise in invisibility. I'd ask questions about Jessica's medical school adventures, celebrate her achievements, and watch my parents beam with pride, all while my own life updates were relegated to brief mentions between passing the potatoes and clearing the dishes. My therapist, Dr. Levine, had spent the past year helping me identify these patterns and encouraged me to set boundaries and advocate for myself. "Your achievements deserve recognition too," she would remind me during our sessions. Your worth isn't diminished by your sister's success. Intellectually, I understood this, but emotionally, I still craved my parents' approval and acknowledgement. So when my director promotion came through, the role I'd been working toward for years, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps this accomplishment was significant enough to finally earn the respect and recognition I'd been seeking from my family for so long. The 2 weeks between my promotion announcement and the celebration party passed in a blur of excitement and preparation. I threw myself into party planning with my mother, hoping this shared project might bridge some of the emotional distance between us. We spent hours on the phone discussing guest lists, menu options, and decorations. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just to celebrate my achievement, but to create a moment my family couldn't minimize or forget. The weekend before the party, I spent an entire day shopping for the perfect outfit. After trying on countless dresses, I finally found one that made me feel both professional and confident. A deep blue sheath dress that complemented my auburn hair and made my green eyes pop. It cost more than I usually spent on clothing, but this occasion warranted the splurge. As I stood in the dressing room, admiring how the dress hugged my figure in all the right places, I imagined the impressed looks on my colleagues' faces and, more importantly, the proud expressions I hoped to see on my parents. The initial collaboration with my mother on the guest list had gone smoothly. I wanted to invite my close colleagues, friends from college who lived nearby, and of course, my boyfriend David and his family who had always been supportive of my career. My mother suggested inviting extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins who lived within driving distance, and neighbors who had known me since childhood. I readily agreed, touched that she wanted to make this a significant celebration. But the first minor incident occurred during a phone call 3 days before the party. "I think we should keep the celebration modest," my mother said after I suggested hiring a professional photographer to document the event. "It's just a promotion. After all, we don't want to appear boastful." Her words stung like a paper cut, small but surprisingly painful. Just a promotion minimized the years of work, stress, and sacrifice that had gone into this achievement. I took a deep breath and reminded myself not to read too much into her comment. "It's an important milestone for me, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "But we can skip the photographer." The second minor incident happened the next day when my mother called to ask if Jessica could bring some of her medical school friends to the party. "They're in town for a conference," she explained, and Jessica thought it would be nice for them to stop by. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I experienced whenever Jessica's presence expanded to overshadow mine. "It's supposed to be my celebration, Mom," I said carefully. "Won't it be weird to have people there who don't know me?" My mother's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Of course, if it's important to Jessica, they can come," I finally conceded, hating myself for the automatic accommodation but wanting to avoid conflict. That evening, as I relayed these conversations to David over dinner, his usually gentle face hardened with frustration. "Rachel, you need to speak up," he urged, reaching across the table to take my hand. "This is your day. Your family needs to respect that." I nodded, knowing he was right, but also aware of the complex family dynamics at play. "I just want one day where it's about me," I confessed, voicing the thought that had been circling in my head. "One celebration where I'm not competing for attention or validation." David squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Then make sure they understand that," he said simply, as though setting boundaries with my family was as straightforward as presenting quarterly marketing objectives. Despite these early warning signs, I remained determined to stay positive. This promotion represented years of hard work, and regardless of my family's reaction, I deserved to celebrate it properly. As I finalized the last details with the caterer and confirmed the playlist of my favorite songs, I pushed away the nagging worry that history would repeat itself. This time would be different, I told myself. This time, my achievement would stand on its own. The day of the party arrived with perfect early summer weather, sunshine filtering through fluffy white clouds and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of my mother's prized roses. I arrived early to help with final preparations, finding my childhood home transformed into a celebration space. The dining room table had been extended to its full length and covered with a crisp white tablecloth, holding an impressive spread of appetizers. Blue and silver balloons, my favorite colors, floated from strategic corners, and a congratulations banner hung across the living room archway. My mother greeted me with a warm hug, looking elegant in a floral dress I hadn't seen before. "The caterers just finished setting up in the kitchen," she said, leading me through the house. "Your father's picking up the cake." For a moment, the scene before me, my mother's careful preparations, the thoughtfully decorated space, filled me with gratitude and hope. Maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe today truly would be different. By 4 o'clock, guests began arriving. First came my college roommate Tara and her husband, bearing a gift bag and enthusiastic hugs. Then a stream of neighbors, distant relatives, and friends filled the house with chatter and laughter. At 4:30, I spotted my boss, Richard, walking up the driveway. I felt a surge of validation. The CEO of Horizon Media Group had made time on a Saturday to attend my celebration. "I wouldn't miss this," Richard said when I thanked him for coming. "You've earned this promotion through exceptional work, Rachel. We're lucky to have you on our leadership team." His genuine praise, spoken within earshot of my father who had just returned with the cake, sent a thrill of vindication through me. My father slapped Richard on the shoulder with unexpected enthusiasm. "That's our daughter who just got promoted," he told another arriving guest, a note of pride in his voice that I rarely heard when he spoke about my career. The sound of it was intoxicating, and I found myself standing taller, smiling wider. By 5 o'clock, the party was in full swing, with about 40 people mingling throughout the first floor and backyard patio. David arrived with a bouquet of my favorite lilies, planting a supportive kiss on my cheek and whispering, "You deserve all of this and more." With David by my side, I floated through conversations, accepting congratulations and sharing anecdotes about my journey to the director position. Several of my colleagues had made the hour-long drive from the city, and their presence reinforced the professional respect I'd earned. Around 5:30, my mother clinked a glass for attention, and the room quieted. "We're here to celebrate Rachel's promotion to marketing director," she announced, her voice carrying across the space. "We're so proud of her dedication and hard work." She raised her glass in my direction. "To Rachel!" The room echoed the toast, and I felt a lump form in my throat as I stepped forward to say a few words. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me today," I began, scanning the supportive faces. "This promotion represents years of effort, and having you all here means the world to me." I continued with brief thanks to my team members present, to Richard for his mentorship, to David for his unwavering support, and finally to my parents for hosting the celebration. The applause felt genuine, and for a blissful hour I basked in the warm glow of achievement and recognition. I had meaningful conversations with relatives who seemed genuinely interested in my work, received thoughtful cards and gifts, and even witnessed my usually reserved father describing my recent successful campaign to an attentive neighbor. The third minor incident occurred so subtly I almost missed it. I was deep in conversation with Richard about our upcoming strategy for a major client when my mother appeared at my elbow, interrupting mid-sentence. "Richard, would you excuse us for a moment? I need Rachel's opinion on something in the kitchen." I apologized to Richard and followed my mother, expecting some party emergency. Instead, she asked, "Do you know what time Jessica will arrive? Should we wait to bring out the main course?" The question seemed innocent enough, but the interruption of an important professional conversation for such a trivial matter sent a familiar pang through my chest. "She texted she'd be here by 6, I replied, keeping my tone light despite the internal warning bells. "Don't hold up the food on her account." I returned to find Richard engaged with another colleague, the moment for private conversation with my boss lost. I pushed down the flicker of resentment, determined not to let small things spoil the day. But as 6 o'clock approached, I noticed my mother checking her watch and glancing toward the front door with increasing frequency, and I couldn't help but sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a collective holding of breath, an anticipation that had nothing to do with my celebration and everything to do with my sister's imminent arrival. The front door opened at exactly 6:15, and Jessica's melodic laugh preceded her physical presence. She entered like a gust of fresh air, her dark hair, so unlike my auburn waves, pulled into an elegant updo, her slender figure showcased in a simple yet expensive-looking emerald dress. Where I had always been the more reserved sister, Jessica possessed an effortless charisma that drew people toward her like magnets. "Sorry I'm late," she announced to the room at large, her voice carrying over conversations that immediately hushed at her appearance. Traffic was horrible, and then we had to stop for gas. She rushed toward me, enveloping me in a perfumed hug. "Congratulations, Rach. I'm so proud of you. Director of Marketing. That's huge." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, and for a moment I allowed myself to relax into her embrace, to believe that my sister could be present without overshadowing me. That illusion shattered within minutes. My mother, who had been circulating among guests with trays of appetizers, materialized at Jessica's side with remarkable speed. "Darling, you're here at last," she exclaimed, as though the party's true guest of honor had finally arrived. "Let me introduce you to Rachel's boss." Without asking either of us, she whisked Jessica away to meet Richard, leaving me mid-sentence, in a conversation with my cousin. I watched as my mother proudly announced not only Jessica's presence, but also her recent accomplishment, acceptance into one of the country's most prestigious cardiology residency programs. Richard, ever the polite professional, offered appropriate congratulations before attempting to steer the conversation back to marketing topics. But my mother persisted, elaborating on Jessica's academic achievements and future medical career, effectively transforming my boss into a captive audience for my sister's accolades. The fourth minor incident occurred during what should have been my moment, the official toast. David had just handed me a fresh glass of champagne, and I had clinked my spoon against it, preparing to thank everyone for coming. As the room quieted and attention turned my way, my mother suddenly appeared with a small velvet box. "Before Rachel says a few words," she interjected, "I wanted to show everyone something special. Jessica just received this award from her medical school for exceptional patient care during her internship." She opened the box to reveal a small gold pin, which she proceeded to pass around for guests to admire. My prepared toast died on my lips as conversations immediately erupted about the award, medical school, and Jessica's accomplishments. Across the room, I caught Tara's sympathetic wince and David's darkening expression. My college friends exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their understanding of the situation. I forced myself to take several deep breaths, counting backward from 10 as Dr. Levine had taught me during therapy. When I finally managed to reclaim attention for my toast, the moment felt diminished, the energy dispersed. Throughout the next hour, the pattern continued with increasing obviousness. Every time I found myself at the center of a conversation about my career or promotion, my mother would find a way to redirect attention to Jessica, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly. "Rachel's new position sounds impressive," I overheard, her telling my aunt, "but you should hear about the research Jessica is contributing to. They're making breakthroughs in cardiac care that could save thousands of lives." Jessica herself seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, occasionally trying to deflect attention back to me with comments like, "But this is Rachel's day," or "I want to hear more about Rachel's promotion." But the damage was being done incrementally, systematically. With each passing minute, I felt my special day slipping away, transforming into yet another showcase for my sister's achievements. My resentment built slowly but steadily, a simmering pot threatening to boil over. Around 7:30, David pulled me aside onto the patio, away from the crowd. "We could leave," he suggested quietly. "Go celebrate properly with just our friends. You don't have to stay and endure this." Part of me wanted desperately to take his offer, to escape the familiar pain of being rendered invisible in my own family narrative. But a stronger part refused to surrender what was rightfully mine. "No," I said firmly. "This is my celebration. I've earned it. I'm not leaving." David squeezed my hand, concern evident in his eyes. "Just remember, you don't have to put up with this anymore. You're not that little girl desperate for their approval." His words echoed my therapist's guidance, but implementation proved harder than theory. As the party continued, I found myself withdrawing internally, questioning my own reaction. Was I being petty? Overly sensitive? Was my promotion truly less significant than Jessica's residency acceptance? The marketing director position represented the culmination of years of strategic career building. But did it pale in comparison to saving lives? The doubt crept in like a fog, obscuring my perspective and dampening my initial joy. I watched as several of my colleagues made early departures, their uncomfortable awareness of the family dynamic evident in their hurried goodbyes and extra warm congratulations. Each exit felt like a personal failure. My professional circle, witnessing my inability to claim space even at my own celebration. The party's atmosphere shifted substantially after dinner was served. What had begun as my celebration had transformed into a strange hybrid event, where my promotion seemed increasingly like a footnote to Jessica's medical career. My mother, holding court in the living room, didn't even attempt subtlety anymore. "Marketing is fine," I overheard her telling my father's cousin, "and we're proud of Rachel's dedication. But medicine, now that's a calling. Jessica will be saving lives, while most people are just selling products." The casual dismissal of my entire profession stung like alcohol on an open wound. I caught Jessica's expression, a mix of embarrassment and helplessness, but she made no move to correct our mother's assessment. The guests had naturally segregated into groups, with my friends and colleagues clustered supportively around. Me on the patio while family members flocked to Jessica in the living room. Uncle Robert, who hadn't asked me a single question about my promotion, cornered Jessica with detailed inquiries about cardiac procedures. "Is it true that stent technology has improved recovery times?" he asked eagerly. "My golf buddy just had one placed last month." Aunt Diane wanted Jessica's opinion on her arthritis medication. Cousin Michael's wife sought advice about their newborn's sleep patterns. It seemed everyone had momentarily forgotten why we were gathered in the first place. The fifth minor incident occurred during what should have been a simple family photo session. My father, attempting to document the celebration, called for a family picture. "Rachel in the middle," he directed, "since it's her special day." But as we assembled, my mother rearranged our positions. "Jessica, you stand in the center with Rachel," she instructed, "and then everyone else around you both." What began as one quick family photo expanded into an impromptu photo shoot featuring various combinations of Jessica with different relatives, each one exclaiming how photogenic she was, how the camera loved her. When I suggested a photo with just my colleagues and me, my mother frowned slightly. "We should be inclusive, Rachel. Everyone together." My attempt to carve out even this small moment for my professional achievement was rebuffed. I retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on dessert, but really to collect myself. Through the doorway, I could hear my mother's voice, animated and proud, describing Jessica's residency program to anyone who would listen. "Only 3% of applicants get accepted," she boasted. The director said her research proposal was one of the most innovative they'd seen in years. I busied myself arranging coffee cups, trying to quell the rising sense of invisibility that threatened to overwhelm me. David found me there, his expression a mix of concern and controlled anger on my behalf. "Your mother just introduced me to your cousin as Jessica's sister's boyfriend," he reported quietly. "Not even by my name or yours." The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but the humor quickly dissolved into hurt. More of my colleagues were making discreet exits, offering congratulations and promises to catch up at work, their discomfort with the family dynamic evident in their hasty departures. Tara approached me with undisguised concern. "Rachel, are you okay? This is not what I expected." Her diplomatic phrasing couldn't mask her shock at how my celebration had been hijacked. "I'm fine," I lied. The automatic response so practiced, it felt like muscle memory. "You know how my family is." But I wasn't fine. The cumulative effect of each slight, each redirection, each dismissal, was building toward something I could no longer contain. My therapist's voice echoed in my mind. Repressed feelings don't disappear. They transform and resurface, often destructively. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment of privacy to process the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Locking the door behind me, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, cheeks flushed with a combination of hurt and anger, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Am I overreacting?" I whispered to my reflection. "Is it selfish to want one day to be about my achievement?" The rational part of my brain understood that Jessica wasn't actively trying to steal my spotlight. She was simply existing in a family system that had always prioritized her. But knowing the dynamic wasn't entirely her fault didn't lessen the pain of once again being rendered secondary, even at an event specifically organized to celebrate me. The pattern had persisted for so long that it had become our family's gravitational force. Jessica at the center, everyone else orbiting around her, with me perpetually pushed to the furthest rings. As I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my lipstick, I made a decision. I would not cause a scene. I would maintain dignity. I would finish this party gracefully and then process my feelings later with Dr. Levine. I would not let this become another family story about Rachel's overreaction or Rachel's jealousy. I returned to the party with renewed determination to salvage what remained of my celebration. But as I stepped into the living room, I realized I had dramatically misjudged how far the situation would deteriorate. I returned from the bathroom to find my mother standing in the center of the living room, tapping a dessert fork against her wine glass to gather everyone's attention. The distinctive chiming cut through conversations, and a hush fell over the remaining guests. My mother beamed at the assembled crowd, her confidence radiating as she prepared to speak. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate Rachel's promotion," she began, nodding in my direction with a perfunctory smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're certainly proud of her hard work and dedication to her advertising career." The slight hesitation and mischaracterization of my profession. I was in comprehensive digital marketing strategy, not merely advertising, was subtle but unmistakable. I felt David tense beside me, his hand finding mine in silent support. "However," my mother continued, her voice lifting with genuine enthusiasm, "while we're all gathered here celebrating achievements, I think this is the perfect opportunity to focus on Jessica's incredible accomplishment as well." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as my mother's intentions became clear. This wasn't going to be a brief acknowledgement of Jessica's residency acceptance. This was a complete redirection of the entire event. As some of you already know, Jessica recently received news that she's been accepted into the cardiology residency program at Massachusetts General, which is consistently ranked as the #1 hospital in the nation. My mother's voice swelled with undisguised pride. "Only 3% of applicants are accepted. 3%. She gestured for Jessica to join her at the center of the room. My sister rose reluctantly, her expression a complicated mix of embarrassment and resignation. She'd been in this position before, thrust into the spotlight by our mother's overwhelming pride, but never at an event explicitly meant to celebrate my achievement. "Jessica will be following a research track focusing on innovative treatments for heart failure," my mother continued, her arm around Jessica's shoulders. Her supervising physician told her that her research proposal was one of the most promising they'd seen from an incoming resident in years. The detailed praise continued, each superlative driving the knife deeper into my chest. I stood frozen, watching my celebration being systematically dismantled and reconstructed around my sister. Some guests, primarily my family members, nodded along enthusiastically, completely untroubled by the blatant redirection. Others, my friends and remaining colleagues, shifted uncomfortably, exchanging concerned glances and darting sympathetic looks in my direction. The final blow came when my mother gestured to my father, who had disappeared into the kitchen. Moments earlier, he returned carrying a cake, not the one I had glimpsed earlier with, "Congratulations on your promotion, Rachel," written in blue icing, but a completely different one. This cake was white with red accents, the colors of the medical profession, and bore the inscription, "Congratulations, Dr. Jessica," in elegant script. "We had this made specially when we heard Jessica's news," my mother explained to the stunned room. "We thought today would be the perfect opportunity to celebrate both our daughters." The pretense that this was still partially my celebration had worn tissue thin. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the cake, at my beaming mother, at my uncomfortable but complicit father, at Jessica's conflicted expression. The room seemed to waver around me, voices becoming distant as though I were underwater. 7 years of hard work, of proving myself in a competitive industry, of sacrifices and stress and determination. All of it reduced to an afterthought at my own celebration, completely overshadowed by my sister's accomplishment. The pain was so acute it felt physical, a crushing pressure in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. Jessica, to her credit, attempted to redirect attention. "Mom, this is Rachel's party," she said, her voice low but carrying in the awkward silence that had descended. "We can celebrate my news another time." But my mother waved away the concern. "Nonsense! We're all family here. We can celebrate both. Our girls at once." She began cutting the cake, serving Jessica the first piece with ceremonial flourish. I watched my colleagues exchange glances before making subtle moves toward the door, clearly eager to escape the uncomfortable family dynamic now on full display. Richard, my boss, approached me with genuine concern. "Rachel, I should head out. Early meeting tomorrow. Congratulations again on the promotion. The team is lucky to have you in leadership." His eyes conveyed understanding and sympathy that his words couldn't explicitly express in this setting. David's grip on my hand had tightened to the point of discomfort, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by barely contained indignation. "Rachel," he whispered urgently, "you don't have to stand for this. Say something or let's leave." I felt suspended between two impossible choices: speak up and risk being labeled dramatic and jealous, or remain silent and once again allow myself to be erased within my own family narrative. As I watched my mother place the celebration cake in front of Jessica while my relatives clustered around to congratulate her, something shifted inside me, a lifetime of accommodation and self-doubt crystallizing into sudden, sharp clarity. As I stood watching my celebration disintegrate around me, memories cascaded through my mind with startling clarity, a mental slideshow of all the times I had been rendered invisible in my own family. I remembered my high school graduation, where my parents' conversation at dinner afterwards centered on Jessica's upcoming dance recital rather than my valedictorian speech. I recalled my college acceptance to Northwestern being overshadowed by Jessica's perfect SAT scores, despite her being only a sophomore at the time. The pattern had been established so early and reinforced so consistently that I had internalized it as normal, as deserved. The voice of my therapist cut through these painful recollections. "Family dynamics are powerful, Rachel, but they're not immutable. Patterns continue until someone is brave enough to break them." I had nodded during that session, intellectually, understanding her point while emotionally believing that someone could never be me. Yet standing in my parents' living room, watching my mother serve my sister cake at my promotion party, something fundamental shifted within me. The realization dawned with startling clarity. This pattern would continue indefinitely unless I chose to disrupt it. No magical moment of recognition would suddenly make my parents balance their attention and validation. No amount of achievement would ever be enough to correct the imbalance if I didn't advocate for myself. My therapist had explained how family systems work, how each member plays an assigned role that becomes so embedded in the family's functioning that any deviation causes discomfort and resistance. I had been cast as the self-sufficient, independent daughter who didn't need attention or validation, while Jessica was the celebrated golden child whose achievements warranted constant acknowledgement. These weren't roles we had chosen, but ones we had been gradually molded to fulfill through years of reinforcement. I felt a complex wave of emotions crash through me, hurt so deep it left me breathless, anger that burned like acid, and beneath it all, a surprising sense of clarity and resolve. The physical sensations were overwhelming, my heart pounding against my ribs, my throat constricted, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. But alongside these reactions came a strange calm, a certainty about what needed to happen next. I watched. My relatives clustered around Jessica, exclaiming over the cake and peppering her with questions about her residency. I saw my remaining friends and colleagues standing awkwardly at the periphery, witnessing my humiliation with sympathetic discomfort. And I observed my mother, animated, glowing with pride as she detailed Jessica's accomplishments to an attentive audience completely oblivious to or unconcerned with how her actions affected me. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that my sense of self-worth couldn't continue to hinge on receiving validation from people fundamentally incapable of providing it. The approval I had been seeking for decades would never come, in the form I needed. This realization, while painful, was also strangely liberating. For so long, I had attributed the constant overlooking of my achievements to some fundamental lack in myself. That if I were somehow more accomplished, more interesting, more worthy, then surely my family would acknowledge me properly. Now, I understood that the issue had never been my worthiness. It was the family system itself that was broken. I glanced at David, his face tight with controlled anger on my behalf, and made my decision. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I'm going to say something. I need to do this." His expression shifted from anger to concern mixed with pride. "I'm right here," he murmured back, squeezing my hand in reassurance. Taking a deep breath, I moved toward the center of the room where my mother was in the middle of describing Jessica's research proposal in enthusiastic detail. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I approached the side table where the microphone from earlier toasts still rested. With hands that trembled slightly but purposefully, I picked it up, feeling its weight as both a physical object and a symbol of the voice I had suppressed for too long. The chatter in the room continued unabated, no one noticing my movement, until I switched on the microphone, creating the soft feedback hum that drew all eyes in my direction. Standing tall in the dress I had chosen so carefully for my celebration, I prepared to speak up and reclaim what was mine. I cleared my throat, the sound amplified through the room, cutting conversations short as heads turned toward me. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to mild irritation at the interruption, while Jessica's features registered immediate understanding and concern. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I wanted to take a moment to address something important." I paused, feeling the weight of 4 decades of silence pressing against my chest, but pushed through it with new determination. "First, I want to acknowledge my sister's incredible achievement. Jessica, your acceptance to the cardiology residency program is truly remarkable, and I am genuinely proud of you." I met her eyes across the room, wanting her to understand that my issue wasn't with her success. "Your dedication to medicine and patient care is inspiring, and I have no doubt you'll make an extraordinary cardiologist." Jessica gave me a small nod, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and apprehension about where my speech was heading. I took another steadying breath before continuing. "That said, I need to address the fact that this gathering was organized specifically to celebrate my promotion to marketing director, a position I've worked toward for 7 years through consistent sacrifice, strategic career building, and dedication to my craft." My voice remained calm but took on an edge of authority I typically reserved for boardroom presentations. "What we've witnessed today is unfortunately not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern that has defined our family dynamic for as long as I can remember." The room had fallen completely silent, the tension almost tangible as guests froze in place, unsure where to look. My mother's face had drained of color, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father stood beside her, his expression a complicated mixture of discomfort and dawning recognition. Throughout my life, I've watched my achievements, milestones, and significant moments consistently redirected to focus on Jessica. This isn't Jessica's fault. She never asked for this spotlight. But the pattern has been both persistent and damaging. I maintained eye contact with my parents as I spoke, refusing to back down from the truth I was finally articulating. For years, I've felt invisible in my own family, my accomplishments minimized, my career dismissed as less important, my moments of celebration transformed into opportunities to highlight someone else's journey. My voice wavered slightly, but I pushed through, determined to finish what I had started. I've spent countless hours in therapy working to understand why my self-worth became so dependent on validation I was never going to receive. I've struggled to recognize my own achievements as valuable when the people who should have been my biggest supporters consistently treated them as secondary. The silence in the room had become almost unbearable, guests shifting uncomfortably as my family's dynamic was laid bare before them. But I couldn't stop now. Years of suppressed truth were finally finding expression. Today was meant to be a celebration of a significant professional milestone, one that represents years of strategic work, leadership development, and proven results in a highly competitive industry. The fact that this celebration has been systematically redirected is not just hurtful, it's emblematic of a pattern that needs to end. I straightened my shoulders, feeling a strange new power in naming what had always been present but never acknowledged. I want to be absolutely clear. I am immensely proud of my promotion. I am proud of my career in marketing. I am proud of the campaigns I've developed, the teams I've led, and the results I've achieved. My work has value and significance, regardless of whether it receives recognition within this family. I glanced around the room, making brief eye contact with my remaining colleagues and friends, drawing strength from their supportive expressions. I've decided that I will no longer participate in a family dynamic that requires me to diminish myself and my accomplishments. I deserve celebration and acknowledgement, just as Jessica does. I deserve to take pride in my journey without constant comparison or redirection. I turned back to my parents, my voice softening slightly but remaining firm. I love you both, and I know you love me, but love without respect and recognition is incomplete. I'm not asking for special treatment, just equal consideration. I placed the microphone down on the side table with deliberate calm. I'll be leaving now to continue my celebration with people who value my achievements. Thank you to those who came today with genuine support and congratulations. It meant more than you know. The silence that followed was absolute. Faces around, the room registering shock, embarrassment, and in some cases, dawning recognition. Jessica was the first to move, crossing the room toward me with tears in her eyes. "Rachel, I'm so sorry," she said quietly, reaching for my hands. "I never wanted to overshadow you. I should have spoken up sooner." Her apology felt genuine, and I squeezed her hands in acknowledgement. "This isn't about you, Jess. It never was. You deserve every celebration and accolade, just not at the expense of mine." My mother recovered next, her face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and indignation. "Rachel, I don't think this was the appropriate time or place to air family grievances," she said stiffly. "You've embarrassed us all with this display." Her dismissive characterization of my moment of truth-telling as a display confirmed that she hadn't truly heard me, but I felt strangely unbothered by her reaction. For perhaps the first time, her approval seemed less important than my own. Self-respect. My father surprised everyone by speaking up next. "Martha, stop!" His voice was quiet but firm, silencing my mother's budding lecture. "Rachel's right. We've been doing this for years, making everything about Jessica while treating Rachel's accomplishments as secondary. I've seen it happening but never said anything. That was wrong." His unexpected acknowledgement brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he continued, meeting my gaze directly. "Your career and achievements are extraordinary, and we haven't given them the recognition they deserve. That's on us, not you." The room erupted into awkward murmurs and movements as guests tried to process the family drama unfolding before them. Some looked away in embarrassment, others watched with undisguised fascination, while my close friends moved protectively closer to me. David slipped his arm around my waist, a gesture of both support and readiness to leave. What followed was 20 minutes of intense family discussion that fluctuated between defensive justifications, tearful apologies, and attempts at reconciliation. My mother cycled through denial. "We've always been equally proud of both of you." Anger. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" And eventually, the beginning stages of reluctant recognition. Perhaps we have sometimes focused more on Jessica's path. My father, having broken his pattern of silent complicity, continued to speak up, acknowledging specific instances where my achievements had been overlooked or diminished. Jessica, for her part, expressed genuine remorse for not recognizing and challenging the dynamic sooner. Throughout this emotional exchange, I maintained a calm centeredness that felt entirely new, no longer desperate for their approval or validation, but speaking my truth and setting boundaries from a place of self-respect. When David eventually checked his watch and murmured that we should leave if we wanted to meet friends at the restaurant we'd arranged as a backup celebration, I nodded and began making my goodbyes. Some relatives avoided eye contact, clearly, uncomfortable with the confrontation they had witnessed. Others offered subdued congratulations on both my promotion and my courage to speak up. My closest friends gathered their belongings to join us at the restaurant, their solidarity a balm to the raw emotions of the evening. As David and I walked toward the door, my mother called after me, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Rachel, please don't leave like this. We can talk more, fix this." I turned back one last time, feeling neither triumph nor bitterness, but a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. "We will talk, Mom, but not tonight." Tonight, I'm going to celebrate my promotion properly, with people who are genuinely happy. For me. With that, David and I stepped out into the evening air. The weight of decades of silence finally lifted from my shoulders. 6 weeks passed before I had a real conversation with my mother. The days following my confrontation at the party were filled with a strange mixture of emotions: liberation and anxiety, pride and doubt, relief and grief. I threw myself into my new director role at work, finding comfort in the clear metrics of success and the straightforward validation that came from executing strategies that delivered results. David remained a steady presence, neither pushing me to reconcile with my family nor encouraging me to maintain distance, simply supporting whatever path I chose to heal. My weekly sessions with Dr. Levine took on new depth as we worked through the aftermath of my confrontation. "What you did took extraordinary courage," she said during our first appointment after the party. "Breaking entrenched family patterns is one of the hardest psychological tasks we face as adults." We talked about the concept of differentiation, the process of defining yourself apart from your family of origin while still maintaining connection. "The goal isn't to sever ties," she explained, "but to establish healthier boundaries and interactions." The first contact came 3 days after the party, a text from Jessica. "Can we meet for coffee? Just us." We met at a quiet cafe halfway, between her hospital and my office. The conversation was initially awkward, but gradually opened into something honest and healing. "I never realized how much Mom and Dad dismissed your career," Jessica admitted, stirring her latte absently. "I mean, I knew they made a big deal about medicine, but I didn't see how that came at your expense." I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the dynamic without becoming defensive. "It wasn't your responsibility to notice," I assured her. "You were just accepting the affirmation any child would want from their parents." We talked for hours, peeling back layers of our shared history to examine how the family system had shaped both of us. Me as the overlooked child constantly seeking validation, her as the golden child burdened with excessive expectations. "Sometimes I feel like nothing I achieve will ever be enough," she confessed. "Mom and Dad have built this narrative about my brilliance and success that doesn't leave room for mistakes or uncertainty." For perhaps the first time, we connected, as adults rather than as competitors in our parents' attention economy. My father called next, his voice gruff with emotion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Rachel," he said. "You were right about everything. I let your mother set the tone for how we treated you and Jessica, and I never stepped in when I should have." His admission without excuses or qualifications felt like a gift. "I always saw your drive and independence," he continued. "But instead of admiring those qualities, I used them as an excuse to focus less on you. I told myself you didn't need the encouragement as much as Jessica did." He paused, clearing his throat. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." We arranged to meet for lunch the following week, just the two of us, something we had rarely done throughout my adult life. Over sandwiches at a deli near my office, we talked about my career in detail, my father asking thoughtful questions about marketing strategies and campaign metrics. For the first time, I felt him engaging with my professional life with genuine interest rather than polite detachment. My mother proved the most resistant to change, as Dr. Levine had predicted. "Family systems fight to maintain homeostasis," she explained during one session. "Your mother's identity is deeply invested in the established dynamic. Change threatens her understanding of herself and her role." When my mother finally called 3 weeks after the party, her approach was cautious and somewhat defensive. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "I still think the timing was inappropriate, but I understand you felt overlooked." It wasn't the full acknowledgement I might have hoped for, but it was an opening. We agreed to meet for dinner, an evening that proved emotionally exhausting but ultimately productive. My mother cycled between justifications. We were just proud of Jessica's medical career, minimizations. "I'm sure we celebrated your accomplishments, too," and occasional moments of genuine reflection. "Perhaps we did take your resilience for granted." By dessert, we had reached a tentative truce, with my mother agreeing to be more mindful about how she acknowledged my achievements, and my agreeing to communicate my feelings more directly before they reached a breaking point. The healing process wasn't linear. There were uncomfortable family dinners where old patterns threatened to reemerge, moments when I had to gently but firmly redirect conversations, and instances where I needed to step away to maintain my newly established boundaries. But gradually, incrementally, the dynamic began to shift. 2 months after the promotion party debacle, my parents invited David and me to dinner at their home. I accepted with some trepidation, unsure what to expect. When we arrived, I was surprised to find a small cake on the dining room table with, "Congratulations, Director Rachel," written in blue icing, the same cake that had been overshadowed at the party. "We wanted to do this properly," my father explained, his expression earnest. "Just us, celebrating you." My mother, still working on expressing genuine enthusiasm for my career, had nevertheless made an effort to ask specific questions about my new role and responsibilities. The evening wasn't perfect, but it represented genuine effort and change. The professional impact of my newfound assertiveness surprised me most. In meetings at Horizon, I found myself speaking up more confidently, challenging ideas when necessary, and advocating for my team with new conviction. Richard noted the change during my first quarterly review as director. "There's a solidness to your leadership that's really developed these past few months," he observed. "You're not just competent, you've always been that. But now you seem more anchored, more willing to take up space." My personal relationships evolved as well. With David, I found myself less anxious about seeking reassurance, more secure in articulating my needs and boundaries. Friendships deepened as I learned to invest in people who celebrated my successes rather than diminishing them. Most significantly, my relationship with Jessica transformed from one of unconscious competition to genuine sisterhood. Free from the roles we'd been assigned by our family system, we discovered common ground and mutual respect that had previously been obscured by the uneven distribution of parental attention. 6 months after the confrontation, I found myself mentoring a young woman named Alicia, who had recently joined the marketing team. During a check-in meeting, she confessed her struggle with a senior colleague who consistently took credit for her ideas. "I don't want to seem difficult," she explained, her concern mirroring my former hesitation to advocate for myself. Drawing from my own experience, I leaned forward and said what I wished someone had told me years earlier. "Your voice matters, Alicia. Your work matters. And you deserve recognition for both." As I spoke these words, I realized how completely I had internalized them for myself. No longer merely intellectual concepts, but lived truths that had transformed my relationship with myself and others. The journey towards self-validation wasn't complete. There would always be moments of doubt and old patterns attempting to reassert themselves. But I had discovered something essential. Finding my voice changed not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. In speaking up at that promotion party, I had broken not only a family pattern, but also an internal one, the belief that my worth needed external confirmation to be real. Now I understood that while recognition from others might be pleasant, the most important validation would always come from within. Have you ever had to speak up in a situation where you felt consistently overlooked or undervalued? What gave you the courage to finally break that pattern? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that your achievements deserve recognition, and sometimes that starts with recognizing them yourself. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more experiences that might reflect your own journey. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to speak your truth when it matters most. I'm Ashley Bennett, 23, from Minneapolis, and my whole life I've dreamed of studying international human rights law. When I got selected as a finalist for the prestigious Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford, it should have been the happiest moment of my life. But growing up with a sister like Megan, who always received preferential treatment from our parents, taught me to prepare for sabotage. Still, nothing could have prepared me for discovering my passport missing just days before my international interview. The betrayal cut deep, especially when my parents defended her, saying some opportunities weren't meant for everyone. If you've ever had your dreams sabotaged by someone close to you, give this video a like and let me know where you're watching from. Stick around to see how I turn this devastating betrayal into my greatest triumph. Growing up in our middle-class Minneapolis neighborhood, I always had my nose in a book while other kids played outside. My parents, Robert and Lisa Bennett, both worked in healthcare, Dad as a hospital administrator and Mom as a nurse. They provided a comfortable life, but from an early age, I knew I wanted more than our modest suburban existence. My passion for human rights began in sophomore year when Ms. Chambers, my world history teacher, showed us a documentary about international war crime tribunals. Something clicked inside me that day, and I joined the debate team, focusing on international humanitarian issues. I excelled academically without much effort, maintaining a 4.0 GPA throughout high school while participating in Model UN, student government, and volunteering at a legal aid clinic downtown. My sister Megan, just 2 years younger, couldn't have been more different. Where I was studious and serious, Megan was social and carefree. She struggled to maintain passing grades but excelled at making friends and charming adults. She was captain of the cheerleading squad, always surrounded by admirers, and somehow managed to sweet-talk her way out of every consequence. The pattern started early in our childhood. When I received an A on a difficult test, my parents would nod and say, "That's what we expect from you, Ashley." But when Megan barely passed, they'd throw a celebration dinner for her improvement. When I saved my allowance for months to buy a laptop for schoolwork, they saw it as expected responsibility. When Megan blew her money on clothes and came up short, they covered the difference, claiming she's still learning financial management. This uneven treatment became our family's unspoken dynamic. I learned to be self-sufficient, working at the campus library and as a research assistant throughout college while maintaining perfect grades. I lived at home to save money, commuting an hour each way to the University of Minnesota. Meanwhile, Megan got her own apartment near her community college, mostly funded by our parents, who claimed she needed independence to flourish. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on my goal, becoming an international human rights attorney. During my junior year, Professor Martinez, my international law professor and eventual mentor, suggested I apply for the Rhodes Scholarship. "With your grades, experience, and passion, you have a real shot," she told me after class one day. The Rhodes would cover everything: tuition, living expenses, travel, and research funds for graduate studies at Oxford University. For someone like me, working 3 campus jobs just to afford textbooks, this opportunity seemed like a fantasy. The application process was grueling: essays, recommendations, interviews with the university committee. I spent months preparing while juggling classes and work. When the email arrived announcing I was a national finalist, requiring an international interview at Oxford itself, I couldn't believe it. This was my ticket out, my chance at a prestigious career path that my family could never afford to support otherwise. I remember running to Professor Martinez's office, showing her the email with shaking hands. "I told you," she said, beaming with pride. "Now the real work begins." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. I applied for an expedited passport, saved every penny for the plane ticket, and practiced interview questions with anyone willing to help. As the interview date approached, I couldn't help but notice Megan's attitude shifting. Her usual passive-aggressive comments about my boring academic life took on a sharper edge. "Oxford, huh? Guess you'll be too important for us normal people soon," she'd say at family dinners. Or, "Must be nice to have everything come so easily to you." Our parents never corrected these jabs, sometimes even nodding along. Despite the tension, I never imagined they would actively try to derail my future. I was naive enough to believe that despite our differences, family would ultimately support each other's dreams. I had no idea how wrong I was about to discover I'd been all along. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly strained as my interview date approached. What started as Megan's occasional sarcastic comments evolved into daily needling about my superiority complex and how I was abandoning the family for some fancy British school. Mom and Dad, instead of mediating, often chuckled at her remarks, as if they were harmless jokes rather than deliberate attempts to undermine my confidence. One Tuesday evening, about 2 weeks before my scheduled flight, I spread my application materials across the kitchen table to review my personal statement one last time. Megan strolled in, coffee mug in hand, and leaned over my shoulder. "Still obsessing over that scholarship thing?" she asked, her voice dripping with dismissal. Before I could respond, her hand slipped, sending hot coffee cascading over my carefully organized papers. "Oops," she said with mock concern while I frantically salvaged what I could. When I looked up at her, there wasn't even a pretense of remorse in her eyes. Instead, I caught something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "Are you serious right now?" I demanded, blotting coffee from my personal statement copy. "It was an accident, Ashley," Mom interjected from the doorway. "Don't be so dramatic. Everything can be reprinted." That same night, during dinner, Dad asked about my Oxford plans. Before I could answer, Megan interrupted. "I don't get why you need some fancy foreign degree anyway. Plenty of good schools right here in Minnesota." Dad nodded thoughtfully, as if she'd made an insightful point. "Your sister has a point, Ashley. Seems like you're going through an awful lot of trouble when you could just stay local." I stared. At them, fork suspended midair. "This is the Rhodes Scholarship," I said slowly. "It's one of the most prestigious academic opportunities in the world. People work their entire academic careers hoping for this chance." Mom patted my hand condescendingly. "We know it's important to you, honey. We just worry you're setting yourself up for disappointment if it doesn't work out." Later that night, I heard voices as I passed Megan's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I couldn't help overhearing her talking to our parents. "She already thinks she's better than all of us," Megan was saying. "Can you imagine how unbearable she'll be if she actually gets this thing? We'll never hear the end of it." What shocked me most wasn't Megan's words, but my father's response. "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes Ashley doesn't realize that her ambitions affect the whole family. Not everyone gets to chase these kinds of dreams." I retreated to my room, heart pounding. The next day, I called my best friend Zoe, who'd been my confidant since freshman orientation. Unlike my family, Zoe had celebrated every step of my Rhodes journey. "They're being weird about Oxford," I confessed. "Especially Megan. She's making these accidents that keep threatening my application materials." Zoe's response was immediate and concerned. "Ashley, you need to lock up your important stuff. Your passport, your acceptance letter, everything." I laughed it off. "Come on, they wouldn't actually sabotage me. They're family." Zoe wasn't amused. "Family can be the most dangerous people when they're threatened, and your success threatens Megan's whole identity as the special one." I dismissed her concerns, but took some basic precautions anyway, moving my passport from my desk drawer to a locked box in my closet. Still, I couldn't shake the growing unease as my departure date approached. The weekend before my flight, I overheard Megan on the phone with a friend. "Yeah, Oxford interview this week," she was saying. "I know, right? So pretentious. But don't worry, I doubt anything will come of it." Her confident tone sent a chill through me. That night, I double-checked my locked box, confirming my passport was still there. 6 days until my flight. 5 days. 4. With each passing day, the tension in our house ratcheted up another notch. My parents began casually mentioning alternative careers that wouldn't require moving abroad. Megan's sabotage attempts grew bolder, unplugging my alarm clock before an important prep call, hiding my car keys when I had a meeting with Professor Martinez. I started sleeping with my locked box under my bed, but even then I never truly believed they would cross the final line. That was my mistake, underestimating just how far they would go to keep me in the place they had designated as mine in our family hierarchy. The betrayal happened 3 days before my scheduled flight to London. I woke early that morning to finalize my packing and review my interview materials one last time. Following my new routine, I reached under my bed for the locked box containing my passport and other essential documents. The box was there, still locked, seemingly untampered with. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped instantly. My passport was gone. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I emptied the entire box, searching frantically through the remaining documents, credit cards, and birth certificate. I tore apart my room, checking every drawer, every pocket, every possible place where I might have misplaced it. But deep down, I already knew what had happened. After an hour of increasingly desperate searching, I confronted Megan in her bedroom. She was still in pajamas, scrolling through social media on her phone with a relaxed smile that vanished when she saw my face. "Where is it?" I demanded, not bothering with preliminaries. Megan's expression shifted instantly to wide-eyed innocence, a look I'd seen her perfect over years of evading consequences. "Where's what? What are you talking about, Ashley?" "My passport. It's missing from my locked box." I watched her face carefully, years of suspicion finally crystallizing into certainty. "How would I know anything about your passport?" she replied, voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Maybe you misplaced it. You have been pretty stressed lately." As she shifted position on her bed, I caught a glimpse of something blue peeking out from beneath her pillow. The edge of my passport, carelessly hidden in her haste. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, lunging forward to grab it. Megan was faster, snatching it and holding it behind her back. "Ashley, you need to calm down," she said, backing toward her door. "Mom, Dad, Ashley's freaking out." They appeared within seconds, as if they'd been waiting nearby. "What's going on?" Dad demanded, looking between us with a frown that suggested I was the problem. "She took my passport from my locked box," I said, pointing at Megan. "It's right. There, behind her back. I need it for my flight in 3 days." I expected shock, anger on my behalf, parental intervention to set things right. Instead, my father sighed heavily, exchanging a meaningful look with my mother. "Ashley, sit down," he said, gesturing to Megan's desk chair. "We need to talk about this Oxford situation." "What Oxford situation?" I remained standing, incredulous. "The interview I've been preparing for all year? The opportunity of a lifetime? That situation?" My mother perched on the edge of Megan's bed, putting an arm around my sister's shoulders. "Honey, we've been thinking it might be best if you focused on more realistic goals. Law school here in Minnesota, perhaps. There's no need to go all the way to England." I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing. "You're not serious? You're actually supporting her stealing my passport? Do you understand that's a federal offense?" My father's face hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Ashley. No one's committing any crimes here. We're trying to help you see reason." "By stealing my passport? How is that helping me?" "Some opportunities," he said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "aren't meant for everyone. We're concerned that you're reaching beyond what's practical, beyond what's best for this family." The words hit me like physical blows. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity they had never believed in me. Worse, they actively wanted me to fail. "Give me my passport," I said, my voice unnaturally calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. Megan clutched it tighter, looking to our parents for support. "I think we should hold on to it for now," my mother said softly, "until you've had time to reconsider." I looked at each of their faces in turn, searching for any sign of shame or doubt. There was none. Only resolute determination to keep me exactly where I'd always been. The responsible, reliable daughter who would never outshine her sister or leave her parents behind. Without another word, I walked out of Megan's room, down the hall to my own, and closed the door quietly behind me. Only then did I allow the tears to come, muffling my sobs with a pillow as the full weight of their betrayal crashed down on me. For hours, I lay there, cycling through disbelief, rage, and despair. How could they do this? How could my own family sabotage something so important to me? As evening fell, I called Zoe, barely able to form coherent sentences through my tears. "They took my passport," I whispered. "My own parents are helping Megan keep me from going to the interview." Zoe's outrage was immediate and validating. "That's beyond messed up, Ashley. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, the hopelessness threatening to drown me. "Without a passport, I can't go, and there's no way to get a new one. In 3 days. There was a long silence on the line before Zoe spoke again. "Maybe not," she said slowly. "But what if you don't need a new one?" I didn't understand what she meant, but her tone had shifted from anger to something else. Something that sounded almost like hope. What Zoe said next changed everything. "Remember that conversation you had with Professor Martinez last semester? About having contingency plans?" The memory surfaced immediately. 3 months earlier, after a particularly tense weekend at home, where Megan had accidentally deleted a draft of my scholarship essay from our shared computer, I'd arrived at Professor Martinez's office hours visibly upset. She'd listened patiently as I vented about my family's subtle undermining of my academic pursuits. Family dynamics can be complicated, especially when one member is reaching for something extraordinary, she had said. But here's something I've learned in my career. Always have a backup plan. For everything. At the time, her advice had seemed generally applicable to academic preparation. Now it took on new meaning. Ashley, Professor Martinez had continued, lowering her voice slightly. I don't want to overstep, but I've seen this pattern before with other students. If your family's behavior concerns you, perhaps we should take some practical precautions. She had then suggested I apply for a duplicate passport, explaining that it was perfectly legal to have 2 valid passports under certain circumstances. Better to have it and not need it, she'd said with a knowing look. Following her advice, I'd submitted the application for a duplicate, citing potential travel overlap for academic purposes. When it arrived, Professor Martinez had offered to keep it secured in her office safe. Just in case, she'd said. I'd almost forgotten about that second passport, tucked away in her office. It had seemed like an excessive precaution at the time. Now it looked like salvation. I need to call Professor Martinez, I told Zoe, hope flickering to life, right now. Despite the late hour, Professor Martinez answered on the 3rd ring. I quickly explained the situation, my words tumbling out in an anxious rush. I was afraid something like this might happen, she said, her voice calm but sad. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 8:00? I'll be there early to prepare for my lecture. I'll be there, I promised, already mentally planning my escape. That night, I lay awake, listening to the occasional murmurs from my parents' room down the hall. They were discussing me, I was certain. Planning how to handle my inevitable continued resistance. Little did they know I was done fighting them on their terms. The next morning, I left the house at 7:30, telling my mother I was going to the library to think things over. The skeptical look she gave me suggested she didn't entirely believe me, but she didn't try to stop me either. Professor Martinez was waiting in her office, a travel mug of coffee in hand and concern etched into her face. Ashley, she said, giving me a brief but fierce hug. I'm so sorry about your family's behavior. It's inexcusable. From her desk drawer, she retrieved my backup passport. I suppose this is why we planned ahead, she said, handing me the small blue booklet that represented my freedom. Holding. It felt surreal, a tangible symbol of escape from the trap my family had set. I can't go back home, I realized aloud. Not until after the interview. They'll just take this one too. Professor Martinez nodded, already ahead of me. I've spoken to a former student who has a furnished guest room. She's happy to have you stay until your flight. No charge. Tears welled in my eyes at this unexpected kindness. I can't thank you enough. Don't thank me, she replied firmly. Just go to that interview and show them the brilliant mind I've had the privilege of teaching. We quickly outlined a plan. I would go back home while my family was out that afternoon, pack only what I absolutely needed, and leave a note explaining that I knew what they had done and that I would be proceeding with the interview regardless. Professor Martinez arranged for her former student, Julia, to pick me up a block from my house to avoid any potential confrontation. That afternoon, I executed the plan flawlessly. My parents were at work, and Megan was at her standing Wednesday hair appointment. I packed efficiently, interview outfit, casual clothes, toiletries, laptop, and documents. Before leaving, I wrote a brief note. I know what you did, and I know why. I'm disappointed, but not surprised. I will be attending my interview as planned. Please don't try to contact me until I return. I placed it on the kitchen counter where it would be immediately visible. As I locked the front door behind me for what might be the last time, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at the broken trust, anger at their betrayal, but most predominantly, a surprising sense of liberation. Julia, a corporate attorney who had been Professor Martinez's student 5 years earlier, greeted me warmly and drove me to her stylish apartment in downtown Minneapolis. Professor M changed my life too, she told me as she showed me to the guest room. Anything you need, just ask. Over the next 2 days, I focused entirely on interview preparation. Professor Martinez arranged mock interviews with other faculty members, providing invaluable feedback on my responses. The hardest question to practice for was about family support. They'll likely ask about your support system, Professor Martinez warned, standard for Rhodes candidates. We crafted a response that was technically truthful, but omitted the recent betrayal. I've been fortunate to have strong academic mentorship throughout my education, I would say, before pivoting to discuss the supportive university environment. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from my family, escalating in urgency as they realized I was serious about proceeding with the interview. Megan's messages started with angry accusations. Way to cause drama as usual. Then came my mother's concerned texts. Ashley, please come home so we can discuss this rationally. Finally, my father's thinly veiled threats. If you go through with this foolishness, don't expect us to continue supporting you financially. That last message almost broke my resolve. My part-time campus jobs barely covered my personal expenses. Without my parents' contribution to tuition, how would I complete my final semester? But Julia, overhearing my moment of doubt, offered perspective. If you get the Rhodes, none of that matters. If you don't, there are other options. Loans, scholarships, even legal action for the passport theft if necessary. But right now, focus on the opportunity in front of you. She was right, one problem at a time. First, the interview. Everything else could wait. The night before my rescheduled flight, I barely slept, my mind racing with interview questions, family betrayals, and the enormous stakes of the coming days. Despite everything, a part of me still couldn't believe this was happening, that my own family had tried to sabotage my future, and that I was defying them so completely. In the darkness of Julia's guest room, I made myself a promise. Whatever happened with the scholarship, I would never again allow anyone, family or otherwise, to limit my potential. The morning of my flight brought new complications. A text from Zoe. Your parents came by my apartment looking for you. Said they're worried sick. I didn't tell them anything, but heads up, they're searching. This new development sent a wave of anxiety through me. Would they think to check the airport? I couldn't risk running into them at the terminal. After a quick consultation with Julia, we developed a new strategy. She would drive me to St. Paul International instead of Minneapolis, a smaller airport with connecting flights to Chicago, where I could then catch my transatlantic flight to London. The route was less direct and more expensive, depleting almost all of my savings, but it minimized the chance of a confrontation. As we drove to the airport, another message appeared, this time from my father. Ashley, this has gone far enough. Your mother is beside herself with worry. If financial concerns are driving this rebellion, we can discuss increasing your allowance. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. They still didn't understand or refuse to acknowledge that this wasn't about money. It was about opportunity, growth, and most fundamentally, respect for my autonomy. I didn't respond to any messages, focusing instead on reviewing my interview materials during the drive. Julia walked me all the way to security, giving me a fierce hug before I entered the line. You've got this, she said. Whatever happens, you've already won by not letting them stop you. The journey to Oxford passed in a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. Every announcement over airport speakers made me jump, half expecting to hear my name called, to see my parents appear to drag me home. The relief I felt when the plane finally lifted off from American soil was indescribable. Only then did I allow myself to cry, silent tears streaming down my face as I stared out the window at the receding lights of Chicago. The passenger next to me, an elderly woman with kind eyes, quietly passed me a tissue without comment. The emotional toll of the past few days hit me fully during that flight. Between fitful attempts at sleep, I found myself cycling through feelings of betrayal, doubt, and determination. Had I overreacted? Was I destroying my relationship with my family for a chance at a scholarship I might not even receive? The questions tormented me, but underneath them ran a current of certainty. What they had done was wrong. Stealing my passport was not an act of love or protection. It was control, pure and simple. The fact that they couldn't see that, or wouldn't admit it, only confirmed I was making the right choice. I arrived in London exhausted but functioning on adrenaline. The tube ride to Paddington Station, then the train to Oxford, felt surreal. The English countryside flashing past the window might as well have been another planet compared to the suburban Minneapolis neighborhood I'd left behind. Oxford itself was both exactly as I'd imagined and completely different. The ancient stone buildings emanated history and prestige, making me feel simultaneously awed and inadequate. My budget hotel room was small but clean, within walking distance of the interview location. After a quick shower, I forced myself to review my preparation materials one more time before collapsing into bed, setting 3 separate alarms to ensure I wouldn't oversleep. That night, the dreams came. Nightmares where I arrived at the interview to find my family waiting, where my passport disappeared again, where Professor Martinez revealed she had been working with them all along. I woke repeatedly, drenched in sweat, checking that my passport was still under my pillow. The morning brought no messages from home, an ominous silence that suggested they were either respecting my space or planning something else. Either way, I couldn't afford to worry about it now. I dressed carefully in the interview outfit I'd packed, a navy blue suit that had consumed 3 paychecks but projected exactly the professional image I wanted. As I applied minimal makeup, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked older somehow, her eyes holding a new wariness. I arrived at the interview location 30 minutes early, joining a small group of equally nervous candidates in an ornate waiting room. Everyone else seemed to be chatting comfortably, exchanging stories about their universities and accomplishments. I sat slightly apart, unable to engage in small talk while my mind raced with all that had happened. First time in Oxford? A friendly voice broke through my thoughts. A young woman with a British accent and a warm smile had taken the seat beside me. Is it that obvious? I attempted a smile in return. American accent. Plus you look like I feel every time I interview somewhere new. Terrified but trying not to show it. Her candor surprised a genuine laugh out of me, the first in what felt like weeks. I'm Charlotte, she continued. Developmental economics at Cambridge, but please don't hold that against me. Ashley, international law at Minnesota. We chatted easily for the next few minutes, her friendly manner helping to settle my nerves. When my name was called, Charlotte gave me a thumbs up. You'll smash it, she whispered as I stood. The interview room contained a panel of 5 distinguished academics, seated at a long table with my application materials before them. They introduced themselves with formal politeness, then began with standard questions about my academic interests and career goals. I answered automatically, falling into the practiced responses I'd rehearsed countless times with Professor Martinez. Then came the question I'd been dreading. Family is an important support system for Rhodes Scholars, given the pressures of the program. How have your loved ones responded to your application? For a moment, I froze, the practiced answer vanishing from my mind. In its place came an impulse toward honesty that I couldn't suppress. My academic mentors have been incredibly supportive, I began, sticking to the script. Then, deviating, my family situation is complex. My parents and sister have their own vision for my future that differs from mine. Their response to this opportunity has been challenging, but navigating that challenge has only strengthened my resolve and independence. A flicker of interest passed between the panel members. The woman at the center leaned forward slightly. Could you elaborate on how you've navigated those challenges? This was dangerous territory, but something told me that authenticity mattered more than perfection in this moment. When obstacles appeared, I said carefully, I found resources and support outside my immediate family. I learned to create backup, plans for every contingency. I paused, then added, most importantly, I learned that other people's limitations shouldn't define my aspirations. The panel's reaction was unreadable, but the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. The questioning moved on to my research interests and past academic work, but with a new energy, as if they were seeing me more clearly now. As the interview concluded, the center panelist said something unexpected. Ms. Bennett, resilience isn't listed as an official selection criterion for the Rhodes, but perhaps it should be. Thank you for your candor. Walking out of that room, I felt a curious lightness. Regardless of the outcome, I had represented myself honestly. For the first time in days, I checked my phone, finding dozens of missed calls and messages from my family. I silenced it again without reading any of them. Their drama could wait until I was back on American soil. Whatever happened next, I had done what I came to do. No one, not even my own family, had been able to stop me. My return flight to the United States was scheduled for 2 days after the interview, giving me a brief window to explore Oxford before heading home to face whatever awaited me there. I spent those days wandering the ancient university town, imagining what it would be like to study in those hallowed halls, to become part of the institution's centuries-long tradition of scholarship. The beauty of the place was almost painful given how uncertain my chances of returning were. The Rhodes was fiercely competitive, with thousands of qualified applicants vying for a handful of positions. My interview had gone well, I thought. But was it enough? On my final evening in Oxford, I found myself sitting on a bench by the River Cherwell, watching punters glide past in the golden late afternoon light. For the first time since discovering my missing passport, I allowed myself to fully process what had happened with my family. The betrayal still stung sharply, but the distance, both physical and emotional, provided a new perspective. Their actions, while inexcusable, suddenly seemed pathetic rather than powerful. They had been so threatened by my potential success that they'd resorted to literal theft to prevent it. What kind of insecurity drove such behavior? I thought about Megan, my sister who had always been the family favorite, always received the benefit of the doubt. Had she ever truly been happy? Or was her entire identity built around being the special one, the daughter who needed extra help and attention? If my success so threatened that identity that she felt compelled to sabotage me, perhaps her position wasn't as enviable as I'd always believed. As for my parents, their behavior revealed a disturbing smallness of vision. They had actively tried to clip my wings rather than celebrate my chance to soar. What fear drove that choice? Fear of change? Of being left behind? Or simply the fear of having their own limited horizons exposed by my broader ones? These reflections didn't excuse what they'd done, but they helped me understand it. And understanding, I realized, was the first step toward deciding what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with them moving forward. The flight back to the United States gave me time to prepare for the confrontation that surely awaited. I decided to stay with Zoe rather than returning home, at least initially. She'd already cleared it with her roommate and made up the couch. For me. Landing in Minneapolis, I felt a strange sense of disconnection. The familiar skyline, the accents around me, even the smell of the airport, all seemed slightly foreign after just a few days away. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed, returning different from the person who had left. Zoe was waiting at arrivals, her familiar face breaking into a wide smile when she spotted me. "International Woman of Mystery returns," she called, pulling me into a tight hug. "I want to hear everything, but not here. My car's in the short-term lot." As we drove to her apartment, I filled her in on Oxford, the interview, and my reflections by the river. "So what's the plan with your family?" she asked as we neared her building. "They've been blowing up my phone too, you know. Your mom even came by the coffee shop where I work." I sighed, unsurprised. "I'll call them tomorrow, let them know I'm back safely but staying with you for now. After that, I honestly don't know, Zoe. How do you move forward with people who were willing to sabotage your future?" Zoe didn't have an answer, and I didn't expect one. Some questions you have to answer for yourself. The next morning, I called my mother from Zoe's phone, knowing she wouldn't recognize the number. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense. "Hello? Mom, it's me. I'm back in Minneapolis." The relief in her voice sounded genuine. "Ashley? Thank God, we've been so worried. Where are you? Are you coming home?" "I'm staying with Zoe for now. I just wanted you to know I'm safe." A pause, then. "Ashley, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this as a family. What you did was very impulsive and concerning." The audacity of her attempting to flip the narrative made me laugh out loud. "What I did? Mom, you and Dad supported Megan stealing my passport. A federal offense, by the way. You actively tried to prevent me from attending an interview that could shape my entire future. And you're concerned about my behavior? We were Trying to protect you from disappointment, she replied, her voice hardening, and from developing unrealistic expectations about your future. Not everyone gets to go to Oxford, Ashley. That's exactly right, Mom. Not everyone does. Only those who earn it through hard work and merit. I deserve the chance to try, regardless of whether I ultimately receive the scholarship. Another pause, longer this time. Your father wants to speak with you. Before I could object, his voice came on the line. Ashley, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point. It's time to come home and discuss this rationally. I am being rational, I replied calmly. I'm making decisions based on what's best for my future and my well-being. Right now, that doesn't include coming home. And what about your tuition for next semester? He asked, the implied threat clear. If you insist on this childish behavior, we may need to reconsider our financial support. I had anticipated this move. I've already spoken with the financial aid office. If necessary, I can take out loans for my final semester. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I'm prepared if it does. The silence that followed told me I'd caught him off guard. He had expected the threat of financial consequences to bring me to heel immediately. We just want what's best for you, he finally said, his voice softer but no more convincing. No, Dad. You want what's most comfortable for you. There's a difference. After ending the call, I felt simultaneously drained and strengthened. Setting boundaries with my family for the first time was exhausting but necessary. The next week passed, in a strange limbo. I returned to my campus jobs and final semester classes while staying on Zoe's couch. My family alternated between angry messages, guilt-inducing pleas, and periods of pointed silence. I responded minimally, maintaining the boundaries I'd established, while processing my own complicated emotions about their betrayal. Then, exactly 9 days after my return from Oxford, an email arrived that would change everything. The email arrived while I was working my shift at the campus library, from the Rhodes Trust, with the subject line, "Following your recent interview." My hands trembled so badly I had to ask a coworker to cover the desk while I stepped outside to read it. Taking a deep breath, I opened the message, expecting either acceptance or rejection. Instead, I found something unexpected. Dear Ms. Bennett, the interview committee was impressed by your academic credentials and personal qualities displayed during your recent interview. Before making final decisions, we would like to schedule a follow-up video interview with you and a member of our selection committee who was unable to attend your in-person session. Please indicate your availability for the coming week. I stared at the screen, unsure what this meant. Was this standard procedure a good sign, a bad one? I immediately forwarded the email to Professor Martinez, who responded within minutes. This is unusual but very promising. They don't request additional interviews unless they're seriously considering a candidate. With renewed hope, I scheduled the video interview for Friday afternoon, booking one of the library's private study rooms for the occasion. When Friday arrived, I dressed formally again, setting up in the study room 15 minutes early to test the connection. At precisely the appointed time, 2 faces appeared on my screen. One I recognized from my Oxford interview, and another, an elegant woman with silver-streaked hair who introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Harrington, Selection Committee Chair. Ms. Bennett, thank you for making yourself available, Dr. Harrington began. I apologize for missing your in-person interview due to a last-minute scheduling conflict. My colleagues were quite impressed, particularly by your candor regarding personal challenges. The interview proceeded professionally, with questions about my research interests and academic goals similar to those I'd answered in Oxford. Then, near the end, Dr. Harrington shifted to a more personal line of inquiry. Ms. Bennett, during your Oxford interview, you mentioned navigating family challenges in pursuit of this opportunity. Without asking you to divulge anything uncomfortable, I'm curious how that experience has shaped your perspective on perseverance and resilience. I considered my answer carefully. It taught me that obstacles can come from unexpected sources, including those we expect to support us. More importantly, it showed me that with the right mentorship and personal determination, those obstacles need not be defining. They can instead become part of the story of how we achieved our goals despite challenges. Dr. Harrington nodded, thoughtfully. One final question. Are you familiar with the BBC's documentary series Paths to Excellence? The apparent non sequitur caught me off guard. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with it. It's a relatively new series exploring the journeys of academic high achievers, particularly those who've overcome significant obstacles. The reason I ask is that I consult for the series occasionally, and your story, from what I've gathered, might be of interest to them. Would you be open to a separate conversation about potentially participating, regardless of the scholarship outcome? This unexpected turn left me momentarily speechless. A documentary about my experience? I would certainly be interested in learning more, I managed to reply. Excellent. I'll have their producer contact you directly. And Ms. Bennett, thank you for your time today. The committee will be in touch regarding the scholarship decision within 2 weeks. After the call ended, I sat in the study room, trying to process this new development. Whether or not I received the Rhodes, my story had resonated enough with Dr. Harrington to suggest me for a documentary. There was a certain validation in that which felt healing after my family's dismissal of my ambitions. True to her word, Dr. Harrington connected me with Sophia Chen, a producer for the BBC documentary series, who reached out the very next day. Our initial call was meant to be exploratory, but Sophia's enthusiasm was immediate. Your journey embodies exactly what our series aims to highlight, she explained. Academic excellence despite personal obstacles, the importance of mentorship, the courage to pursue opportunity even when it means difficult choices. We scheduled a preliminary filming session for the following week, with the understanding that more extensive filming would follow if I received the scholarship. I was both excited and nervous about sharing my story so publicly. Would it further damage my relationship with my family? Or might it help them understand the magnitude of what they'd done? As the days passed, my family's attempts to contact me grew less frequent. Perhaps they were finally accepting my boundaries, or maybe they were simply regrouping, planning their next approach. Either way, the respite gave me space to focus on classes, the potential documentary, and the agonizing wait for the Rhodes decision. The preliminary filming with Sophia was a surprisingly cathartic experience. Talking through my journey on camera, from my earliest academic aspirations to the passport theft and its aftermath, helped me process the events in a new way. Sophia was a skilled interviewer, asking questions that helped me articulate feelings I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. What we're capturing here is not just an academic journey, she told me during a break. It's a coming-of-age story about defining yourself on your own terms. Her words resonated deeply. Whatever happened with the Rhodes, I was no longer the person who had left Minneapolis 2 weeks ago, desperate and betrayed. I was someone who had faced sabotage and still found a way forward. Someone who had learned to create her own opportunities rather than depend on others' approval or support. 10 days after the video interview, another email arrived from the Rhodes Trust. This time, I was sitting in Zoe's apartment, working on a paper for my international human rights law seminar. Seeing the sender, I froze, my cursor hovering over the notification. Open it, Zoe urged from across the room. Whatever it says, we'll deal with it together. With a deep breath, I clicked on the email and began to read. Dear Ms. Bennett, it is our great pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as a Rhodes Scholar. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had to read the sentence 3 times before it fully registered. I'd done it. Despite everything, despite my family's active sabotage, despite having to navigate the entire process virtually alone, I had actually done it. Zoe's excited shriek told me she was reading over my shoulder. Ashley, oh my God, you did it! She threw her arms around me as I sat there, still in shock. The rest of the email contained logistical information, congratulations, and details about the next steps, but I could barely focus on them through the haze of emotion. This scholarship didn't just mean Oxford. It meant freedom, validation, and a future determined by my own abilities rather than my family's limitations. Within an hour of receiving the news, I had calls from Professor Martinez, Sophia Chen, and Dr. Harrington, all offering their congratulations. Sophia was particularly excited. This changes everything for the documentary, she explained. We want to fast-track it now, make it a feature in our upcoming season. How quickly can we schedule more filming? Events moved at dizzying speed after that. Within days, I was signing release forms, filming additional interviews, and discussing the documentary's narrative arc with Sophia and her team. The working title, Beyond Limitations, A Rhodes Scholar's Journey, both thrilled and terrified me. My story would be public, my family's actions exposed, albeit with careful editing, to focus on resilience rather than vilification. 3 weeks into production, Sophia's team created a 2-minute trailer to promote the upcoming documentary. It featured clips from my interviews interspersed with footage of Oxford and the Rhodes House. In one key segment, I briefly described discovering my missing passport and realizing my family had betrayed me. The trailer concluded with a shot of me walking confidently across the Oxford campus, my voice overlay stating, "Sometimes the people closest to you can't see your potential because it challenges their perspective." My journey taught me that true support might come from unexpected places, and that with enough determination, even deliberate sabotage can't stop you from achieving your dreams. The trailer was released on the BBC's social media platforms on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it had reached my family. The first indication came in the form of a text from Megan. "Is this some kind of sick joke? You're dragging our family through the mud on international television?" Then came my father's voicemail, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Ashley, call me immediately. This publicity stunt has gone far enough." My mother opted for an email, her words dripping with martyred distress. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've sacrificed for you?" I didn't respond to any of them immediately, discussing the situation with Sophia first. "This was always a possibility," she acknowledged. "How do you want to handle it?" "We can provide security if you're concerned about a confrontation." I appreciated her concern but didn't think it would come to that. "They're more likely to want to control the narrative than create a scene," I explained. "But I should probably talk to them, set the record straight once and for all." We agreed that any such conversation would not be filmed, respecting the privacy of what would surely be a difficult exchange. 2 days later, my prediction proved accurate when my parents and Megan appeared at Zoe's apartment building. Zoe texted me from work. "Heads up, your family is here asking for you." I didn't let them in, but they're waiting in the lobby. I steeled myself for the confrontation, taking a moment to center my thoughts before heading downstairs. They were standing awkwardly in the lobby, my mother pacing nervously, my father consulting his phone, and Megan sitting sullenly on a bench by the door. When they saw me, 3 pairs of eyes locked onto mine with expressions ranging from anger to apprehension. "Perhaps we should find somewhere more private to talk," I suggested, gesturing to a small seating area in the corner of the lobby. Once seated, my father immediately took control, his voice low but intense. "This has gone beyond a family disagreement, Ashley. You're publicly smearing us, making accusations that could have serious consequences for all of us." I maintained my composure, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm telling my story. A story about perseverance despite obstacles. If you're uncomfortable with your role in that story, perhaps you should have considered that before stealing my passport." "We never stole anything," my mother interjected, her voice quavering. "We were concerned about you traveling alone internationally. We were trying to protect you. The blatant rewriting of history might have worked in the past, but I was beyond manipulation now. Mom, please, we both know that's not true. You weren't concerned about my safety. You were concerned about me succeeding at something that threatened the family dynamic." Megan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You always have to be the center of attention, don't you? The perfect daughter with the perfect grades and the perfect future. Now you're playing the victim on international television. It's pathetic." Something in her tone caught my attention. Beneath the anger, there was a note of something else. Pain, perhaps, or fear. "This isn't about attention, Megan. It's about not letting anyone, even family, limit my potential. And I'm not portraying myself as a victim. I'm showing how I overcame obstacles, including the ones you deliberately placed in my path." My father shifted strategies, his voice softening to the reasonable tone he used when trying to close a difficult negotiation. "Ashley, we understand you're upset. We may have handled things poorly, but surely we can resolve this privately as a family without public exposure. This documentary could damage all our reputations, your sister's career prospects, our standing in the community." I shook my head, cutting him off. I'm not responsible for protecting you from the consequences of your actions. I'm not naming names in the documentary. I'm not out to destroy anyone, but I won't pretend the sabotage didn't happen to make you comfortable. A heavy silence fell over our group. My mother was fighting back tears, my father looked defeated, and Megan stared at the floor. Finally, unexpectedly, Megan spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I was jealous. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its honesty. You've always been the smart one, the capable one. Everyone always said, why can't you be more like Ashley? Teachers, relatives, even mom and dad, though they'd never admit it. She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. When you got selected for that interview, I couldn't stand the thought of you succeeding at something else. Something so huge. It felt like you'd be gone forever. And I'd be stuck here. Always the disappointing daughter. The raw vulnerability in her confession caught me off guard. For the first time, I glimpsed the insecurity behind the sabotage. Not that it excused her actions, but it made them comprehensible in a way they hadn't been before. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unsettled by Megan's uncharacteristic candor. We never meant to hurt you, Ashley, my mother finally said. We just thought, maybe it would be better if things didn't change too much. The admission was telling in its inadequacy. They hadn't considered what was best for me at all, only what was most comfortable for them. After all these years, I finally saw my family clearly. Not malicious, perhaps, but deeply insecure and limited by their own fears. I'm going to Oxford, I said firmly. The documentary will air. Those things are non-negotiable. What happens between us now, whether we have any relationship moving forward, depends entirely on your ability to acknowledge what you did and take responsibility for it. My father began to protest, but my mother placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. We need time to process all this, she said quietly. I nodded, standing to signal the end of our conversation. Take all the time you need. I'll be leaving for Oxford in August. As they filed out of the lobby, Megan lingered briefly. For what? It's worth, she said quietly. I am sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for doing it at all. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was perhaps a beginning. Watching them walk away, I felt a curious lightness. The confrontation I had, dreaded, was over, and I had emerged with my boundaries intact. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. 1 year later, I stood on the ancient stone bridge spanning the River Cherwell, watching punters glide by below, just as I had during my interview visit. Now, however, Oxford wasn't a distant dream, but my home. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and old books, a combination I'd come to associate with my new life. My first year as a Rhodes Scholar had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined when I arrived, nervous and alone, the previous August. Oxford itself was everything I'd hoped for academically and more. The rigorous coursework challenged me daily, pushing the boundaries of my understanding and analysis. My thesis on international legal frameworks for protecting vulnerable populations in conflict zones was progressing well, with my advisor suggesting it had potential for publication. But the most profound changes weren't academic at all. They were personal, shaped by the community I'd found and the distance, both physical and emotional, from my family's limiting expectations. Within weeks of arrival, I'd formed close friendships with a diverse group of fellow scholars. Charlotte, whom I'd met briefly during my interview, became my closest friend. A brilliant economist with a wicked sense of humor, she helped me navigate both Oxford's academic traditions and British culture. Then there was Mirai from Japan, studying theoretical physics, Kwame from Ghana, focusing on sustainable agriculture, and Elena from Italy, whose work in bioethics often intersected with my human rights focus. Together, we formed a tight-knit circle that supported each other through academic challenges and personal growth. They became my chosen family, accepting me fully while encouraging my ambitions, rather than feeling threatened by them. Professionally, opportunities emerged that I couldn't have anticipated. The BBC documentary, Beyond Limitations, aired 2 months after I arrived at Oxford, receiving critical acclaim and unexpected attention. My inbox filled with messages from young people facing similar family obstacles, thanking me for showing that success remained possible, despite lack of support from those who should have been most encouraging. The documentary led to speaking, invitations at conferences and universities, where I shared my perspective on resilience and self-advocacy in academic pursuits. Each speaking engagement helped me reclaim my narrative, transforming painful experiences into insights that might help others. As my professional profile grew, so did my confidence in setting boundaries with my family back home. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. Working with Dr. Rebecca Winters, a therapist specializing in family trauma, helped me untangle the complex emotions surrounding my parents' and sister's betrayal. What they did reflects their limitations, not yours, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session following a boundary-pushing email from my mother. You can acknowledge their humanity without accepting their behavior. The documentary's release had forced a reckoning within my family that might otherwise have taken years. My father initially retreated into angry silence, refusing to watch the film or discuss it. My mother vacillated between defensive justification and tearful apologies that somehow always centered her pain rather than my experience. But Megan surprised me. 6 months after I left for Oxford, she sent an email that showed genuine introspection. I've been seeing a therapist about why I did what I did. I've realized I've spent my whole life defining myself in opposition to you instead of figuring out who I actually am. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I don't think I've earned it. But I want you to know I'm trying to understand why I hurt you and make sure I never do anything like that again. That email marked the beginning of a cautious reconnection. Our communication started small, occasional texts about neutral topics, brief video calls where we carefully avoided triggering subjects. Gradually, as Megan demonstrated consistent respect for my boundaries, our conversations deepened. During my spring break, we scheduled a video call where she shared that she'd transferred to a 4-year university, pursuing a degree in social work, a field she'd discovered genuine passion for. I think I'm finally doing something because I want to, not because of how it compares to you, she admitted. It feels different, better. My parents' evolution was slower and less complete. They made overtures, sending care packages and asking about my studies, but still struggled to fully acknowledge the harm they'd caused. When I returned to Minneapolis briefly during summer break, our reunion was civil but strained. They seemed genuinely proud of my accomplishments but uncomfortable with my newfound independence. We just didn't want to lose you to another country, another life, my mother confessed during a tense lunch. We were selfish, my father acknowledged, the admission clearly difficult for him. We thought we were protecting the family, but we were really just protecting ourselves from change. It wasn't the full accountability I'd hoped for, but it was more honesty than they'd ever offered before. I accepted it as a step in an ongoing process, maintaining the emotional distance I needed to protect myself while leaving the door open for future healing. Now standing on the bridge in my second autumn at Oxford, I reflected on how far I'd come from that desperate moment of discovering my missing passport. The pain of that betrayal would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a profound personal transformation. I had learned to trust my instincts, to create safety nets when bridges might be burned, to recognize when people were reacting to their own insecurities rather than my actions. Most importantly, I had learned that family could be chosen as well, as given that support might come from unexpected sources, and that other people's limitations need not become my own. As I watched a new group of students punt awkwardly beneath the bridge, laughing as they navigated the unfamiliar craft, I smiled at the metaphor. Life rarely moved in a straight line. There were currents and obstacles, moments of being stuck, and moments of unexpected progress. The key was keeping sight of your destination while remaining flexible about the route. My phone vibrated with a message from Charlotte, reminding me about our study group meeting in 20 minutes. As I turned to head back to college, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for this life I had fought so hard to claim. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the knowledge that I was stronger than any obstacle. more resourceful than any sabotage, and worthy of every opportunity I earned. Have you ever had someone close to you try to hold you back from achieving your dreams? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming obstacles and share with anyone who might need a reminder that other people's limitations don't define your potential. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most powerful backup plan is believing in yourself, even when others don't.